just arriving in campus.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. If you still have your NSDA campus tab open, please close it. This will be where you remain. I advise you to click the little green shield in the upper left-hand corner and then click the copy link and then copy paste that somewhere so that if you somehow get bumped out, you can access it. Please.
What did the green shield do?
It's just how you can get a link from there. So in case because he posted the link in NSDA campus. So if you just want to save the link in case you get kicked out of this meeting or something, you could just get it on the green shield.
Oh, so I click the shield and then how do I get the link from the shield?
It should say invite link and then there's a blue hyperlink that says copy link.
I don't plan to get kicked out, but so I'm seeing that, and then I don't see where it says copy link.
It's a list of meeting information, and then I think it should say it there. I don't know if it's mine, but
okay.
It's not the green shield. It's the little eye icon right next to it to the left.
There we go.
Find it.
So I hit copy that, and then where's my clipboard? Oh, okay. Wow, I'll just copy and paste this into.
I just realized you could put it in. I put it in the chat for all of you here.
Oh,
so.
Thank you. Makes sense. And this session goes until what time?
It was supposed to end at 6:30, but since we're starting 10 minutes late, I'm assuming 6:40.
Okay, I saw that in the chat. Yeah, alrighty.
Can someone say something so I can make sure I can hear?
Hello.
Perfect.
Hi.
Thank you so much.
Just while we're waiting for people to come in, I know we probably could decide when everyone comes in. Do we have any particular order we want to debate the bills in?
I was thinking just the order that they're listed. Wind, hand-me-downs, and then national mask mandate.
Okay. Also, is everyone cool with me POing? Obviously, we can nominate other people, but if
I was planning to run as well.
I'm also interested as well. So it looks like we have 3 individuals who'd like to PO.
I believe 4 with Bugamos, Vinicota, myself, and McIntyre.
Oh, I apologize. I did not see McIntyre.
Senator Noonan, do you have a beach background behind you?
Yes, this is my dad's. He uses it for work, and I tried to move it, but I didn't want to go through all the hassle of just moving the entire giant thing out of there. So it's half of a beach background.
I love it. So nice and warm.
Yeah.
Sorry, my connection cut out. Did we decide on a docket?
It's just going to be the order that it's listed on the docket for MinneApple.
Okay, sounds good.
wait, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble pulling up the bill packet. Is the mask mandate bill 3rd in that one? Because if it isn't, we maybe should put it 3rd. Yeah, it is. Okay, awesome.
The order is wind, 1033 program and then masks.
Okay,
I'm
perfect.
sure as much as we'd all love to talk about masks and all of the negation arguments that do or do not exist, it might become redundant quickly.
Right. Okay, perfect.
It looks like all judges are here. The parliamentarian for the round will be Meta Gupta. So you can get everything going. Judges, please make sure on tab room that you click start round. And then just in case you came in here after I pasted this to everyone, please copy and paste this link somewhere so that if you somehow get kicked out of the Zoom, you are able to just click the link and get right back in quickly. Okay, so Meta, I pass the torch to you. Good luck with everything.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. First of all, I really want to congratulate you on making it to the finals round of this tournament. That's a really big deal. Congratulations. And I'm so glad to see all of you. Just wanted to let you know that if I ever look this way, I promise I'm paying attention to you. I have a monitor, and that's why I'm going to keep flipping back and forth between looking at you and not looking at you. It's confusing, I know. So I competed on the circuit for 4 years, locally, nationally, on the state level. I know what I'm doing, and I hope that you guys all know what you're doing since it is the finals round. If you do decide to run to be a presiding officer, please, please, please make sure you've actually read the rules of this specific tournament and are familiar with Robert's Rules of Order, because I do not want to step in. In fact, the less I step in, the better it is for your PO score. And at the end of the day, I just want you guys to have fun, have logical content, and have clash in your speeches and no rehash. That's the most important thing for me. And I know that I've judged for some of you already, so you guys already are familiar with my paradigm. With that, are there any motions on the floor? Senator Mahrota.
I move to open the floor for PO nominations.
With that being stated, are there any nominations? Senator Smith.
I'd like to nominate Senator McIntyre.
Senator McIntyre, do you accept? Any more? Senator Vakaria.
I nominate Senator Vinnacota.
Senator Vinnacota, do you accept?
I accept, thank you.
Any more? Senator Bugianis.
You got it. I move to nominate Senator Smith.
Senator who? Sorry. I believe you cut out for me again.
Sorry. Senator Smith.
Senator Smith, do you accept?
I do accept.
Any other nominations? Senator Smith.
I move to also nominate Senator Bugamas.
Senator Bugamas, do you accept? Are there any other nominations? Any motions? Senator Smith.
Motion to close the floor for PO nominations.
Any objections? Seeing none, we will now go in the reverse order of the nominations and have about 30-second PO speeches. I won't time you, but please keep it to 30 seconds. Senator Bugamas, since you were the last person nominated, the floor is yours.
Great. Hi, everyone. First, I just want to say congratulations to making it to finals. Really awesome job. So I'm just going to keep this short. I know what I'm doing. I've PO'd on the national and local circuit. I'm very familiar with the rules of this tournament. And most importantly, I'll make sure that I run a faster and efficient chamber. I'll be doing preset precedents and questioning just to make sure that everyone has a fair shot of speaking. I'll also keep everyone updated on their precedents and recency. So with that in mind, I really hope you vote for me. And regardless, have a great session.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Alexandra Smith from Eastridge High School in Minnesota, and I have a little bit of a personal request for you. This was the first tournament that I was able to preside in a final chamber ever. Last year was the first time I was able to do so. And since then, I have been working to make my POing known on the national circuit, doing so at TOC, at the UK season opener, at nationals, and at Yale, multiple tournaments all throughout the year. I have really been trying to make this virtual world be possible for everyone to have an equal and equitable voice in. And I hope that you support me in my endeavor to become the PO once again for this tournament. Thank you so much.
Senator Vinnacota.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Senator Rashika Vinakota, coming to you from the beautiful West Coast in California. I've been active on the circuit for the last 5 years, so I'm really familiar with the procedures. I PO'd in both prelims and in my last semifinal round, so I know the procedure. I'm ready to go, and I have a system all in place. Not to repeat what the other senators have said, but the two things that I really prioritize as a PO are brevity and fairness. I'm not going to employ any flowery transitions or little quirks. I'm going to give you my straight and simple answers to be really efficient. The second is fairness. Surprisingly, we have a lot of females in this chamber, which makes me incredibly happy. So I don't think we're going to have a problem with sexism, but I know competition and favoritism is really common in Congress. So I'm going to be really transparent. I'm going to be posting a link to my my live president chart, that which you guys can check at any point during the competition. If you have any questions, you can put that in the chat. I will constantly be checking. Just a note, I also know we have a lot of individuals here from other places, so I will always pause and make sure everyone has a fair chance to speak up, show if they want to speak or question. All I want to do today is make sure you guys have a fun and efficient chamber. And once again, congratulations, and I hope you guys vote me as your PO.
Thank you. Senator McIntyre.
Hi, I'm Senator McIntyre from Eastridge High School in Minnesota, and like all the other candidates before me, I want to make sure that we have a fast, fair, fun, and efficient chamber. I want to make sure that we prioritize fun, though, because debate is something that we all enjoy. This isn't like a job. We should all have fun in this chamber because this is the finals at MinneApple, and we all deserve to be here. So I'd be honored if you would vote for me as your presiding officer.
With that, I'm sending a link into the chat. Please only vote once, and we may have to do a runoff.
Quick point of inquiry. We tried to clear this up in prelims, but can nominees vote for themselves?
Yes.
Okay, just double checking. Thank you.
Okay, it appears we have 12 votes, and as per NSDA procedure, we will now have a runoff between the top two candidates. And so you will be voting in between Vinakota and Smith.
Do we vote on the same straw poll?
I'm sending a link right now.
Okay.
Did you want us to give another speech, or do you want us just to go flat?
We've already heard your speech.
Sounds good.
All right, I just sent another one. Please vote. We're just waiting on one senator to vote. Okay, congratulations, Senator Vinakota. You will now be our presiding officer for the finals round.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to everyone who is now in this round. It is a privilege to be your presiding officer for the final round. And also, I just want to congratulate you all for getting your bid, because this is a top 15 bid. So I'm so glad we're all here and ready to debate. So to begin, I'm just going to go over some of my procedure. You guys know what we're talking about, but rules. So as promised, I'm going to be sending a link to my recency chart after we begin our first speech. So I have a minute to put in everyone's name, and I'll be keeping track of questions, all other tidbits on that document. And I'm aware you guys all know of our timing procedure, but I will go over it once more. In past tournaments, I've noticed how hard time placards have been because of small font or monotony. So I've color coded mine and made them very big. I'm going to give you 2 minutes at 2 minutes completed. I'm going to give you 2 minutes and 30 seconds, which is color coded yellow, when you have 30 seconds remaining, 2 minutes and 55 seconds when you have 5 seconds remaining. And at 3 minutes, I'm going to hold up a fist. At 3:05, I'm going to start counting you down. until 3:10. And at 3:15, I'm going to verbally cut you off because that's already too gracious of a grace period and we want to be as effective as possible. Note to the judges, I know we all are in various locations and we have competitors from different places. So I am going to be pausing and making sure that everyone has a chance to be heard, just to accommodate for internet speeds. Hopefully no one will drop off now that we're on Zoom. Similarly, for direct cross-examination, I will be holding up time placards as well. When you have finished half of your time, I'm going to hold up a 15-second time card. And when you have 5 seconds left, I'm going to hold up this card. And as soon as your 30 seconds is up, I'm going to immediately call on the next senator. Try to finish up your thoughts and move on to the next person. Again, we want to get the most questions in. Lastly, moving on to motions. When you're voting or wishing to make a motion, now that we're in a more stable environment, I will be totally fine with you guys just raising your placard. So make sure your cameras are on at all times so I can see you. If I happen not to catch you, please put it into the chat just to make sure. I want to make sure everyone is heard. Other than that, you guys all know what to do. If you have any amendments, proposals, motions, put them in the chat. I will not be explicitly asking for any, just to promote effectiveness and efficiency. All right, I think that is the end of my spiel, but if you have any other questions or concerns, just let me know real quick. All right, judges, I'm assuming everything's good on your end as well. Awesome, okay. So I know we've kind of discussed a docket. Would we like to formally establish it, or Parley, can we just move forward with what we've discussed earlier?
You need to add a docket and put it onto the agenda. Also, I recommend that you ask the judges to briefly give their paradigms and introduce themselves as well.
All right, of course. I wanted to get the docket done and then we can get started, but if the judges would like to just give a quick paradigm about what people, so speakers know what to be looking for.
I can start. I'm Raina Phelps. I'm a senior econ major at Carleton College. I use she, her pronouns. And I did congressional debate for 3 years in high school on the local, state, and national level. What I'm looking for the most is what I like to call just soundness of arguments. So making sure both that your premises are true and that the conclusion follows from the premises. I also care about delivery, but to me that's secondary to the actual argument. We're congressional debate. We're not a speech event, so argumentation is first to me. But that's not to say for me. But that's not to say that delivery isn't important as well.
Hi, I guess I'll go next. Dustin Greenberg. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I am a Spanish teacher, and also I have coached and judged for the last 6 years congressional debate, and I was congressional debater also for my high school back in 1780 when I went to high school. And I am looking for a great debate. Congratulations on making it to the final. Super exciting. My main things I'm looking for in my main things I'm looking for is clash as well as also making sure that you refute and acknowledge the opposition. I'm looking for that as well, acknowledging some type of opposition. And if you're one of the first speakers of a bill, even if there are no refutations to make, you could maybe refute something that a future speaker might say. If I don't hear that, chances are your score will be a 4 or less. So make sure you incorporate that somewhere into your speech. And have fun.
I can go next. Hello, humans. I am Haley Pierce Ransdell. I use she, her pronouns. I've been in debate since 2011 as a competitor, coached every format, and competed on the college circuit as well in parliamentary debate. All you need to do in front of me is debate. I think a lot of times people focus on speaking pretty. I don't really care about that. What I care about is you actually refuting one another's arguments, not just in generalities, but clashing with the actual warrants themselves. That's something that I wrote on pretty much every single critique sheet during prelims. Making sure you're responding to the actual evidence as opposed to the general claims would be lovely. And also be a nice human. I don't like how snippy it can get sometimes.
All right, I could go. Hey everyone, I'm Cyrus. I'm a second year at Georgia Tech. I used to compete in this event for about 2 years back in high school. In general, what I like to see, you guys are all pretty good speakers. You guys made to finals at national tournament. Congratulations. Just for the argument, I like seeing a lot of refutation and clash, just what everyone else already says. So just have fun, go for it. I look forward to seeing what you guys are gonna do.
Hey, my name is Heather Fairbanks. I judge in the Minnesota circuit. I'm a retired speech and debate coach that has been involved in the activity since 1994. I've coached and worked with all types of debate, and congressional debate is the only one I'm still interested in being part of. So the reason for that is because you all have the chance to be so interesting and exciting and moving, and I hope that you will take that opportunity. I will tell you that my number one pet peeve is being read to on end. I would much rather have you speak to me than read at me. So if you can make sure that you are somehow applying the arguments that you are bringing in, if you can be pointing out what is new or pointing out why you're advancing the debate with anything that is pre-written, that would really, really help me. Otherwise, it's hard to keep my attention span, to be totally honest. So I think you're all super talented. So please, when you read my critiques, realize that I'm giving you ways to improve. My style does not tend to be to give out a lot of yay pretties on there because you already have the yay pretties. That's how you got into this round. So I'm excited. I hope you keep my interest. I just spent 3 hours putting up my Christmas lights, so I didn't realize I was going to have to judge this round. So I'm not caffeinated, and I need you to be interesting and keep me keep my attention.
Okay, so it's up to me. I'm Janet McNally. I have been a speech coach, I've retired speech and debate coach, congressional debate coach for a long time, so long that one of my fellow judges was once my student. So what I do care about delivery in that I want to be able to understand what you are saying. So if you are spewing and talking fast and loud and I can't understand what you're saying, that doesn't go along so well. So I don't need to have a lot of emphasis on syllables, but I do want to be able to understand what you're saying. The other thing that is a huge pet peeve of mine is prepared speeches. I only want to hear 2 prepared speeches, first AF or the authorship speech, and then the first neg. And other than that, you've got to debate on the fly. And I love to hear you refer back to someone else's speech, say what they brought up and how, but anything that furthers this debate along is what I am looking for. That to me is of the utmost importance. So have fun, because if you aren't having fun, this really isn't worth it. Okay, have a good time.
All right, I believe we've heard from every judge. Thank you for giving us your paradigms. We'll move forward for any motions or docket nominations. First, I need Senator Marotra.
I move to open the floor for docket nominations.
Carr is a second. All right, well, we'll go procedure. All right, do we have any nominations on the floor? All right, Senator Mongolick.
I nominate docket A, which consists of wind turbines, hand-me-downs, and then national mask mandate.
All right, Senator Beccaria.
Barring any other further nominations, I move to close the floor for docket nominations.
I do have another nominated docket.
I rescind my motion.
All right, Senator Smith.
I would like to nominate docket B, which consists of first police, then wind energy, then mask mandate.
All right. Any other motions? Senator Mongolick.
Move to close the floor for docket nominations.
All right, that motion is seconded, and assuming unanimous consent, we'll now move forward with voting. All those in favor of docket A, which consists of turbines, Department of Defense, and then mask mandate, please raise your placards now. All right. All those in favor of docket B, which consists of Department of Defense, turbines, and then the mask mandate? All right, there's a clear majority and we have a winner. We will now be proceeding with docket A, which consists.
As per terminate rules, we need to put any legislation with authors at the top of our agenda. We do have the author for the second piece of legislation, Senator McIntyre, with us, so we are not able to debate docket A.
I'm the author for offshore wind industry.
Oh, are you as well? Okay, never mind.
Yeah, all right. So looks like our current docket that we have voted on is still applicable. So we'll be moving forward with docket A. All right, so any other motions? All right, we will now begin debate. All those who wish to speak on the affirmative for the first legislation regarding wind energy or turbines, please raise your placards now. Senator O'Connell, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. This is Representative O'Connell speaking for the first time in this session. Any sign of life from my judges, Parley and Pio, when you guys are ready. I'll also be timing myself with the timer if that's okay with the judges. Al Gore once said, "Years from now, our grandchildren will reflect on humanity's moral courage to solve the climate crisis." Representatives, let them look back to today as the day when we finally made the decision to act on climate change. For our constituency and the future of the world, you pass my piece of legislation. Principally, let's contextualize the problem that's going on within the status quo. The first being that emissions are increasing exponentially. The LA Times in December of last year tells us that the amount of carbon dioxide released by burning fossil fuels is projected to hit over 37 billion tons. Both the US and the EU released 1.7% less carbon dioxide in 2019 than they did in 2018. With these results, we still see so many problems persisting with climate change. We see it impacting the air we breathe and the water that we drink. The EPA itself, in February of last year, furthers that current sources of energy are upsetting the natural balance of chemicals in the world. Specifically, airborne nitrogen pollution affects not only the quality of the air that we breathe, but also the land and the water. Sources of nitrogen from human activity, such as electric power generation, industry, transportation, and agriculture, can all upset the natural balance of this in the environment. However, we see that oil and gas industries are making up a majority of that. As we see, problems continue to persist, yet this Congress fails to take effective action. But second, let's look at how my piece of legislation helps decrease emission and solve these problems. Principally, we see that wind operations are less harmful to the environment. GE Renewable Energy explains that wind is a great source of domestic energy. The United States' wind supply is abundant and unlimited. In the past 10 years, wind power capacity in the US has grown 15% per year, and it's now the largest source of renewable power within the United States. We also see that it's highly sustainable. Wind turbine operations do not directly emit any carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. This will help the United States meet their emission reduction goals and combat climate change. But we also see that with the implementation of an offshore wind industry, it has unique job opportunities and revenue opportunities. The Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy in 2014 furthers that wind energy is cost effective. The utility scale wind is one of the lowest priced energy sources available today at 1 to 2 cents per kilowatt hour. We also see that the wind industry creates jobs. The U.S. wind sector currently employs over 100,000 workers. Wind turbine technicians are becoming one of the fastest growing American jobs. Under my piece of legislation, we take effective action to not only protect marine wildlife, but give new, unique opportunities to our constituents. When we're presented with legislation that ultimately mitigates the effects of climate change, we should do everything in our power to pass it. Whether it's a flood in Florida, a wildfire in California, or a tornado in Texas, every American constituent is affected by the devastating impacts of climate change. Stand with me and pass.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 2 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Noonan.
So this resolution is about offshore wind energy. Are the impacts of on the ocean's wildlife by offshore wind energy known at this moment?
Not necessarily, but there have been a lot of studies conducted explaining that if we have an offshore wind industry, then it's like a artificial reef for marine wildlife.
Right,
so
but are those studies conclusive at this point?
Not necessarily, but we can't know until we try. And if we see harms that are happening, then we can definitely pass the legislation to stop it.
So why is this option our best option to mitigate the impacts of climate change if we know more about other options?
Right, because we've seen that wind energy decreases the amount of emissions that we have exponentially. And I feel like we should be taking action to do that if we can.
Hi, so considering all the benefits that you've given about wind energy, why don't we use it in the status quo?
I'm not entirely sure.
So the reason we don't is just because compared to the other renewable energy sectors, it's not the best option that we have. Why pursue something that isn't like the best way for us to pursue climate change?
Right. So I'm passing this legislation because it gives us an opportunity to have this piece of like offshore wind industry, but also looking at other things.
Let's turn to Representative Noonan's entire argument that we don't know the adverse effects of it.
It doesn't hurt
You
to
can't
try, and if
quantify the
it does
harm.
hurt, we can just get rid of it.
Senator Bhattacharya. Senator, so off that last line of questioning, do wind turbines, and specifically offshore wind turbines, have a long lifespan?
I'm not sure.
They don't. It's 15 to 20 years. Compared to nuclear and other forms of renewable energy, is it comparatively long?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Compared to other forms of renewable energy, is it comparatively long?
Not necessarily, but like Representative Minotra
So why would we
investigate better alternatives while we have an offshore wind industry?
What's the point of doing that? Because growing an industry takes time. Why would you waste time in growing this industry?
Because we have an abundance of wind energy, so why not utilize it?
Do we have any other questioners?
I think Representative Aniceto has a question.
Oh, Representative Aniceto, yes.
Hey, Senator, so where do the majority of the components for wind energy does the US buy from?
Probably different countries.
Yeah, places like the Congo. How are labor regulations in those kind of countries?
Probably not the best.
You're right. And so if we're currently buying from those sorts of countries who are the only ones available with those sorts of materials, how do we create a framework where we're buying from nations that have better labor regulations?
So I'm not entirely sure how we can do that, but I'm sure you can tell me in your speech.
And with that, the cross-examination time has elapsed. Speaker and all questioners may be muted. Seeing as that was a speech on the affirmative, all negation speakers, please raise your placards. Senator Crowley, that goes to you.
Hi, that's Senator Crowley speaking for the first time today. Any indication, I guess if you're not ready would be great, just because there's so many of you. Okay, good. I will assume everyone's ready. In leading the fight against climate change, Greta Thunberg said the world is waking up. And she's absolutely right. Countries all over the world are finally passing climate change policies. Except us, we sit in silent complacency. I want to align my advocacy with that of the affirmation because I agree, it's time we break that silence. But when the affirmation tells you to open your eyes and finally combat climate change, do not be blind to what you see. Fail. Senator O'Connell presents the problem that we face as a chemical imbalance in our water and land, but she doesn't give you a quantitative impact of failing to fight climate change. I will add that missing urgency. What happens if we do not meet our Paris goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius? The National Research Council says that crop yields will shrink by 15%, compromising the livelihoods of 2.5 billion farmers worldwide. It would destroy our food supply and devastate our farmers. But most pressingly, Tim Profeta tells National Geographic on March 22nd of 2018, it would mean the loss of 153 million lives. Judge this debate based on who combats that and who makes doing so impossibly harder. I want to make one thing very clear. This bill isn't enough to meet Paris goals and stop either one of those from becoming the reality. Adam Vaughan tells The New Scientist on November 26 of 2019 that to meet our Paris goals at this point, we would need to cut emissions by 15.7% every year by 2030. At the affirmation's highest ground, assuming we put all of our eggs into the wind basket, it still isn't enough to meet that threshold. Michael Goguen tells the Renewable Energy World that a Department of Energy technical report found that even if 20% of our entire energy grid was completely wind energy, which cannot happen this quickly, we would only reduce emissions by 25% total by 2030. It does not take a math genius to tell you that 25% in 10 years is a whole lot less than 157% in 10 years. Senator O'Connell, our wind energy is abundant, yes, but it's not enough. But what does this bill do? Why does passing it make our fight against climate change harder if it still does something? It's because when you pass environmental policy, big oil gets really mad and lobbies super hard against future policy for the next decade. If you pass this resolution that cannot do enough today, you prevent us from passing one that can tomorrow. Nature Climate Change says on May 28th of 2019 that after the House passed American Clean Energy and Security Act in 2009, between 2009 and 2010, big oil ramped up lobbying against environmental bills, decreasing the probability that they passed by 13% for the following years. That's why we haven't passed climate change comprehensive policies since 2009. We literally have one shot in this decade to combat climate change. Do not blow it on this shell of a policy. Failing maintains the ability to pass reform that will actually preserve our food, jobs, and lives. Passing necessarily takes it away. The world is waking up. It's time we do the same in this debate. Fail.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. That goes to Senator Bugiamas.
Hi, okay, so today's legislation is a resolution, meaning we're setting the framework to invest in wind energy. Isn't that better than nothing in combating the climate crisis?
No, because when you pass this, lobbying goes up and it makes it impossible for us to pass an actual comprehensive thing in the next decade.
What's the difference between this policy and any other policy that threatens big oil?
Like a comprehensive reform deal, like the Green New Deal, for example, something that would actually combat climate change and meet our Paris goals.
To ever pass climate policy if we're constantly afraid of lobbyists? That's not.
Senator O'Connell?
Hi, Representative. Is lobbying inevitable?
Yeah, but I'm saying that while we don't like it, this is the system that we work within, right? Like that's
okay, so why can't we pass and also like look at other methods to mitigate climate change while also having this help us decrease emissions?
Because you won't be able to pass that bill. That's what I'm telling you. If you pass this today, you make it harder to pass something that will actually meet our Paris goals.
But isn't it better to like investigate other different things that can help mitigate climate change rather than just sitting and not doing anything at all?
Yeah, so you can still do that in the status quo. You can do that in the negation.
Then why aren't we doing it?
Actual tangible reform much harder.
Do we have any other questioners? Senator Smith?
So talk to me about the negative consequences of offshore wind farming as opposed to other renewable energy resources.
Yeah, so I would actually argue that other renewable sources are better, which is why we should invest in them instead of wind.
Don't the majority of these resources for renewable energy that are onshore have negative byproducts such as nuclear energy and nuclear waste though?
Yeah, okay, fine. Like that's not my argument. I'm just saying that if you want to actually combat climate change, this is not the bill. Do not exhaust political capital on this one and make it impossible to pass good reform in the future.
Senator Mehrotra?
What's the makeup of the latest Congress that we've elected?
Well, the Senate isn't set yet, but
let's just go with the House.
Okay.
They're more progressive than usual. Like it's more progressive than the last one, which means we're more willing to take on climate change. Why do you think they're more likely to be susceptible to lobbyists?
Okay, yeah, the House was liberal back in 2009 as well. The problem is the Senate.
No, it wasn't liberal in the same way because there's more progressives in the House that are willing
to. Progressives who are willing to pass climate change. Lobbying exists regardless, and they're still like
they aren't susceptible to lobbying.
More elected. The House does not matter if the Senate is the special interest.
And with that, the cross-examination time has elapsed. Speaker and questioners may be muted. Seeing as that was a speech on the negation, all affirmative speakers, please raise your placards now. Senator Pang, you have the floor.
Great. Can everyone see and hear me okay? Awesome. This is Senator Pang, spelled P-A-N-G, speaking for the first time today at the leisure of all. By the way, as a brief note to my fellow competitors and to my judges, if I do accidentally bulldoze over someone during questioning, I promise I'm not doing it on purpose. My audio is pretty faulty, so chances are I just can't hear you. Is everyone ready? Awesome. Just recently, Starbucks started offering what's known as a sippy cup lid in order to eliminate any need for plastic straws in an attempt to save the turtles. That officially means that America's most expensive coffee shop has done more to protect the environment than we as the United States Congress has. Pass this legislation to finally fix that. First is because wind energy decreases energy costs. The Scientific American finds in August that wind is now one of the cheapest sources of energy, costing 1/2 as much as natural gas. So when Senator Crowley brings up the issue of lobbying and how fossil fuel lobbyists are just going to start increasing their lobbying, that just isn't true for two reasons. A is because we've already seen the transition to renewable energy is happening right now. These lobbyists aren't going to be able to stop it. But B, wind energy is now more profitable for these lobbies to start investing in. That means that they're no longer going to be supporting fossil fuels nearly as adamantly as they did in the past. Here's why that's important. The American Council for Energy Efficient Economy found back in July that low-income or rural constituents pay up to 20% of their income on their energy bills. And that percentage is only increasing under COVID-19 as they face the brunt of a global pandemic. Passing this legislation increases research and development, leads to cheaper manufacturing and increased competition, all of which will drastically decrease prices. Ensure that our Americans' cries for help don't fall on deaf ears. But the second reason why we're going to be passing this legislation is because it increases water conservation. The Union for Concerned Scientists continues on September 30th that fossil fuel power plants require water for fuel extraction, generation, and processing. That's why their power plants use 60 gallons of water just for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity. Whenever the negation argues that we don't have enough research on wind energy, understand that it really doesn't matter. Passing today as a resolution increases that research. And if there are any negative harms, then we can just simply repeal it. Here's why that's important. The American Wind Energy Association continues that within the year of 2019 alone, whenever we increased wind energy, we saw the decrease of water consumption at power plants by 103 billion gallons. Our future is at stake. Don't make the wrong choice. The negation is constantly rooted in fear, not facts. So let's ensure that while Starbucks can go ahead and save the turtles, we'll be the one to save our people.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 55 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Crowley?
Yeah, so if wind energy is somehow more profitable for fossil fuel companies than fossil fuels, why are they so adamantly opposed to things like the Green New Deal and the status quo?
Right. So that's because right now under COVID-19, we've seen that investment in green energy has fallen, right? Because these companies are being hit hard. However, today is literally just a resolution. After we've recovered from COVID-19 and we've seen the transition for green energy.
Wait. I'm confused. It's not like fossil fuel companies loved wind energy before COVID. What?
Well, right. But they definitely would have seen that the transition for green energy was—
Senator McIntyre?
So does wind energy typically live up to its potential energy output?
Yes.
Actually, no, it doesn't. It usually falls between 30 to 40% of its potential output. So why is this actually the best source of renewable energy to invest in?
Right. So here's the thing. It conserves water a lot more than, say, like nuclear energy. And B, today's
okay, but Senator,
cross-examination time has elapsed. Both speaker and questioners may be muted. Moving forward, all those who wish to speak on the negation, please raise your placards. Everyone a second. Senator Mongolick, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. That's Representative or Senator Mongolick, and I'll begin with a thumbs up from my judges and PO.
1 second. Your first word.
President Trump thinks that the wind turbines are, quote, killing all of the birds. Unfortunately today, offshore wind turbines are killing our chances at a renewable future. We need to negate today, not because wind turbines are bad, but because offshore wind turbines are terrible. Every affirmative speaker today has given you an impassioned reason for why we need to respond to climate change and why wind energy is the way to do it. I agree. The thing is that no one has advocated for offshore wind turbines. That's because offshore wind turbines are ineffective and terrible. The American Geophysical Institute explains that it's very difficult to build in water deeper than 200 feet. The problem is that the entire West Coast has waters that deep. That makes it prohibitively expensive to build offshore wind turbines. An analysis by the Manhattan Institute this year explains that offshore wind turbines, because of the extreme conditions that they're in, degrade by 5% output every single year. That means that in 10 years, they already have halved their energy output. That means that they're extremely expensive to maintain, and that contractors are incentivized to abandon their contracts before they're over, because the cost to maintain keep on increasing, and because it's so difficult to access these wind turbines. The Manhattan Institute says in general that offshore wind technology is just not a feasible investment at this point. And it gets worse because of climate change. PBS explains in June of 2017 that research has found that the wind turbines are completely destroyed by Category 5 hurricanes. The problem is that, as The Guardian explains in May of 2019, such hurricanes have become 3 times as likely in the past 30 years. This is a problem actively getting worse, which means that as we're building these offshore wind turbines, they will be destroyed by what they're trying to address. It's simply a cycle we can't break with other interventions first. Now, because offshore wind turbines are a naturally fragile technology with a hostile environment, we need to look to an alternative: onshore wind turbines. Now, those are much easier, much more effective, and much more economically feasible, which is why I'm confused why we've prioritized offshore instead. As Stanford explains in December of 2017, land-based wind turbines consume fewer resources and are much more longer lasting because they're so much easier to maintain. Offshore should only be used after all the land space is used up, but for some reason we're prioritizing them right now. Today's legislation is a step in the wrong direction. Senators Pang and O'Connell talk about wind in general and how effective wind technology is. And that's why they should be passing legislation to fund wind technology, but not ineffective offshore wind turbines. Finally, NPR in June of 2019 explains that we need to be carbon neutral by 2050. We have absolutely no chance at that if we're chasing bad leads and implausible outcomes by passing today's legislation. We need to swim or we're going to sink. And for that, we're going to have to leave the ocean.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Pang.
Hey, let's do some science. Is wind stronger and more continuous over water or over land?
I get what you're trying to say, but also like professionals have evaluated this and found that land-based wind turbines are much more effective. Like it's true.
So then empirically, which in the past has generated more energy in a shorter amount of time?
The problem is that the wind is so powerful on the ocean that it literally destroys the turbines. That's what I'm telling you. We have hurricanes that are just going to wreck this technology.
Today's legislation is a resolution. Why can't we fund research and development to make stronger turbines?
Senator Anacito.
Hi, Senator. I'm a little confused. If your problem is with the durability of wind turbines, doesn't today's legislation help to fund the wind industry?
No, my problem is the fact that offshore wind turbines are objectively a worse investment than onshore wind turbines. But for some reason,
your entire point about them being worse than onshore is because of their lack of quality. If we're investing into the improvement of these turbines, doesn't that help to make them more effective?
We can't invest into stopping hurricanes. The underlying technology.
Can't invest to make turbines more durable.
The cross-examination time has elapsed. The speaker and the questioners may be muted. Moving forward, all those who wish to speak on the affirmative, please raise your placards now. All of those who wished. All right, Senator Bugiamas, you have the floor. I think the chair, for my judges, that's Senator Bugiamas. I believe it's school code 27 if it's carrying over throughout the tournament. All right. Is anyone not ready? Okay, perfect. I'm just going to set up my personal timer, put it on do not disturb so it doesn't disturb. And I'll be on my way. A few months ago, the UN gave us a matter of years before we did irreversible harm to our planet, and this Congress has been outpaced by all types of leaders in making progress in this change. Aside from efforts from prime ministers, presidents, and parliaments, scientists have found even grizzly bears are switching from an unsustainable meat-based diet to eating more berries. It's time for this country to be proactive instead of passive and pass today's legislation before it's too late. Now, today's debate shouldn't be a matter of if we should invest in wind energy. Investment in renewable energy is coming no matter what we do, because our energy market as it exists right now is unsustainable. So Senator O'Connell talks briefly in her speech about the climate crisis, but that's not only the cost that we're facing. As Senator Pang explains, wind energy is significantly cheaper than how we're getting energy in the status quo. Allow me to quantify this. Michael Bio, the core author of the Report for Energy Innovation, a renewable analysis firm, weighed the cost of coal and wind. They found that 211 gigawatts of current US coal capacity, 74% of our total coal fleet, is providing electricity that is significantly more expensive than wind or solar. By 2025, that picture becomes even clearer, with nearly the entire US coal sector outcompensated by the cost by wind and solar, even when factoring in the construction of new wind turbines and solar panels. When we pass this bill, we take the first step in making this long, worthwhile investment. So Senator Crowley, of course, today's legislation isn't enough. It's a resolution. Passing sets the framework for us to address this climate crisis, primarily with the wind industry. All this resolution does is set aside funding to handle this crisis in the future, upholding policy plans like the Green New Deal that you mentioned in questioning. But next, allow me to emphasize also why today's resolution is critical in making right now. Now, Senator Mangalik, you concede in your speech that despite their shortcomings, offshore wind turbines will ultimately be feasible. Maybe they won't be our priority, but the problem is that when you pass today's resolution, we ensure that there is funding set aside for that. So they will be our priority, but that doesn't mean that we're not disregarding other forms of investment as well. When we take the first step in investing offshore wind turbines, innovation and quality increase as well. Today's resolution is what makes wind turbines, offshore wind turbines, a worthwhile investment, because the truth is we will invest no matter what. Fortune reports in 2018 that the cost to construct an offshore one wind farm was on average more than $4 billion in upfront cost, already more competitive than gas or coal-fired plants. By 2030, those capital costs are expected to fall by more than 40%. As we cast our ballots in the next few minutes, I'd like to make this decision easy for you. All today's resolution does is set aside funding. This funding can be used however we want it to, but the most important thing is we're committing ourselves to renewable energy in the future. No matter what kind of wind energy and investment is our priority right now, we ensure that innovation and development and the effectiveness of building these can take place, and that only happens when you pass. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Mangalik.
Hi, Representative. Can we build more land wind turbines?
Yes, so we definitely can. I'm just saying that's not a reason to not invest in offshore wind turbines.
But if they are objectively a better investment, why would we prioritize a more expensive alternative?
Well, you explained how ultimately, so offshore wind turbines are going to be more effective. Wind comes over faster, generates energy faster.
They're just more expensive to maintain. Why are we prioritizing them?
So regardless, even if that's true, it's only going to be more expensive if the government doesn't invest in it. Upfront cost of these wind turbines are cheap enough for the private sector.
Senator Vicaria.
Let's go back to this point about an increase in cost. Is it easier or cheaper to maintain something in the ocean than it is on land?
So it's probably not going to be as cheap.
Exactly. So how do we get to any of these impacts of lower cost if it's just more difficult and more expensive to maintain something that's
So it's only going to be more expensive if the United States government doesn't invest in it.
That's not true, because even if we invest in it, maintenance and developing these wind farms is pretty expensive in the ocean.
Right. Well, anything's better than what we have in the status quo right now. And today's resolution.
How exactly do we get to your impact of decreased cost if all you see is increases?
Well, we can invest as much or as little as we want, even if a
cross-examination time has elapsed.
I think
Thank you. Moving forward, all those who wish to speak on the negation, please raise your placards now. Senator Anacito, you have the floor.
This is Senator Anacito speaking for the first time in today's session. Assuming everybody above me is ready, I'll begin. California's devastating fires have extended far beyond forests, last month reaching to the skies, covering every surrounding around it in a red apocalyptic hue. Our country has sunk deeper and deeper into our failures with the environment, and today's legislation only adds to the list of legislation we've passed that fails to clear our skies. Fail today's legislation. first, because it debilitates our already vulnerable economy. Senator McConnell argues that in the long term, wind energy is more financially stable, and she's absolutely right. But in the status quo, Americans are suffering right now. As the Leisure Tourism Database writes in 2016, that as the cost for hotels or house in areas where offshore wind energy will be built near can decrease tourism by almost 25%. However, we need to understand why this is so important. As the US Travel Association and Tourism Economics writes in March of this year, but with COVID-19 and the economic recession, a large part of the 5.9 million jobs lost within the last few months have been within the tourism industry. Whenever we place wind turbines in areas and decrease these numbers, we only continue to harm an industry that has already taken major hits. Senator Pang, buying into a still developing and less popular industry isn't going to suddenly make it popular. Investors haven't supported it in the past and its jobs. And when the many now impoverished Americans can barely afford their current energy bills, funding a new one that'll take years to stabilize won't be the answer. Let's make this clear. We have an abundance of options for renewable energy, but today's legislation chooses to sacrifice employment in the midst of one of the most detrimental economic regressions we've ever had. Next, fail today's legislation because it emboldens unethical labor. When we fund wind energy, we have to turn to our current component suppliers. As the Cobalt Institute writes just this year, that the main compulsory component in windmills is cobalt. In fact, we can't even build windmills without them. But when I asked Senator McConnell where we got these materials from, she didn't know. There's only one nation that's stable enough for us to get cobalt from, and it comes to horrible consequences. As The Guardian writes, in January of 2016, almost the entirety of our cobalt supply comes from the Congo, where more than 40,000 children are tasked with the mining of this. The lack of transparency between us and these countries have consistently kept these abuses at bay, as our nation has turned a blind eye. As they continue to remain as our only supplier for this material, today's legislation only emboldens the abuses faced by thousands of people. In fact, when we continue to empower an industry strife with violence, we only continue to place the values of human life below the value of cost. Today's legislation only hurts thousands. Fail it before it comes up in flames.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 59 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Noonan.
So if this resolution is anticipated to create 200,000 jobs in the offshore wind industry, I'm not really sure how we're going to access any of your impacts about job loss. Can you explain?
Cool. So for us to access those numbers of jobs, it would take months or even years to reach that number of jobs. Right now, if people are in the middle of an economic recession, furthering them into poverty isn't our best option.
But how is this furthering them into poverty? This doesn't have, what's the negative impact of passing this resolution?
It's going to take years for those thousands of jobs to stabilize.
Okay, but we're not going to take away jobs by passing this, are we?
Yes, we are.
Senator Pang.
What's popping, Senator Aniceto? Okay, so you already conceded that in the long term, it's going to be a lot better and more financially stable. Today's legislation is a resolution. Why can't we wait until our economy stabilizes and then implement other items?
Today's legislation means that we fund the wind energy right now, whenever we're in the middle of an economic recession, especially one that's still going.
The whole point of passing a resolution is to pass further legislation that actually takes action. Why can't we just do that?
The problem is funding the wind industry is a direct cause for the loss of jobs.
And with that, the cross-examination period has ended. Both speaker and questioners, please mute yourselves. We're now moving on to our fourth and final cycle for this legislation. All those who wish to speak on the affirmative, raise your placards now. Senator Noonan, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. My name is Senator Noonan from Eastview High School, speaking for the first time this session on the affirmative. And once I get my timer, I will begin I'm just going to assume that everybody's ready unless they say otherwise. Perfect. I agree with Senator Mangalik that this debate needs to be more centered around offshore wind energy specifically. So let me be the one to shift the conversation and close the book on this debate, showing to him and the entire negation why offshore wind energy is the best place we can be putting our money. You will be affirming this resolution today because offshore wind turbines get more wind and any issues with them are solved by this legislation. First, let me answer a question brought up multiple times in this debate, and that's why offshore wind energy? There's a variety of reasons why offshore wind energy specifically is the best solution, such as the fact it's a growing industry and it helps us move away from oil in our oceans. But there is one underlying key reason. There is simply more winds in the ocean, as brought up by Senator Pang in questioning. Stanford University tells you that what separates offshore from onshore is the wind potential. Wind is typically much stronger over bodies of water than over land, resulting in increased power potential and efficiency. One can also argue that as populations rise and land becomes more and more scarce, the placement of these enormous wind farms over the open ocean and out of the way has enormous value. So as we can see, the argument is simple. Offshore gives you more energy. One of the biggest critiques of onshore is that there's not enough wind to make them work. But here is a solution. Funding offshore wind energy will allow us to get the energy that we need to keep our country going. And it will be a much more effective shift to renewable energy than any other alternative. And that is why you are affirming today. But second, Senator Mangalik's complaint is that offshore wind can't withstand storms. But this is confusing because the intent of this resolution is to fund these wind turbines so they can. And they are right now. Yale University tells you, for instance, Louisiana-based Keystone Engineering is experimenting with the newest platform foundations designed to anchor turbines at U.S. offshore wind farm sites. The company is designed a structure called the Twisted Jacket Foundation that reduces cost and storm risk compared to other foundations. So basically, this industry needs funding to continue to be able to fund itself, to be able to withstand storms. Senator Mangalik, you should be affirming this resolution because when you fund these wind turbines, they're going to be able to withstand storms more than they are in the status quo. But finally, I want to address the negation as a whole. Senators, today we are looking at a resolution. It is not a bill. The intent of a resolution is to change our mindset. You'll notice that there is no funding allocated in this resolution. It doesn't have to be. It's a resolution. So when we say that we're going to be funding offshore wind energy, we have the power to determine when that money comes out, when we're going to get that happening, and how we're going to get those jobs into place. This is simply a mindset shift. The problems brought up by the negation are completely unrelated to this piece of this resolution because it is just that, a resolution. So when you see that offshore wind energy is the absolute best way we can combat climate change right now, you are going to be affirming. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 55 seconds. All questioners, raise your placards now. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'm so glad that you brought up the tethering of wind turbines because when it's windier on top of the water, it creates increased vibrations and movements under the water, correct?
Yeah.
And when you have these wind turbines being literally hydraulically rammed into marine ecologies and these current ecosystems, wouldn't you consider that a net environmental harm?
So the beauty of this legislation is, once again, it's a resolution. When we fund
no matter if it's a resolution or not, any offshore wind turbines are tethered into natural marine biology systems.
I would say it's not enough research to really know how much of an impact.
There have been conclusive studies.
Senator Crowley.
Yeah, so I agree that this is a first step, a resolution, as you say, but is it worth passing if it prevents us from taking necessary following steps in the next decade?
I really don't think it prevents us from doing anything more.
Could you explain that? Because no one really contested my argument.
I just think that just by passing a resolution to say, oh, we're going to fund offshore wind energy, I don't think that that really indicates anything else. I think that just for
right, but lobbying
growing
increases the probability of us actually passing stuff to fund it by 13%. Isn't that a net harm?
I really just don't understand how we can't just continue to pass legislation. This is a resolution.
And with that, the cross-examination has ended. Both speaker and questioners, please mute yourselves. We're now moving on to our eighth and final speech for this debate, for this legislation. All those who wish to speak on the negation, raise your placards now. Let me give everyone a second. All right. Senator Beccaria, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. Hi, everyone. That's Senator Beccaria, spelled B-A-K-H-A-R-I-A. That's B-A-K-H-A-R-I-A. I actually can't see all the judges on my screen, so Pio, if you could just let me know when they're all ready, that would be great.
I believe everyone's ready at your first word.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, I'm not gonna lie, today's debate's gotten just a little bit boring. So let's spice things up with a quick game of true or false and see why at the end the negation actually wins today's debate. So first, true or false? We achieve any impacts on climate change when we pass today's legislation. It's a tricky one. I'll let you think about it. Actually, wait, let me just give you the answer. It's actually false. Senator O'Connell started off today's debate championing the ideal that with wind power, we reduce emissions, and they provide none, so we effectively solve the problem of climate change. But then I, Senator Mehrotra, and Senator Crowley both all told you that the best way to reduce emissions you actually don't achieve on the affirmation. But then Senator Noonan came up here and told you that we effectively shift to renewable energy. Senator Crowley directly responds to this in her speech by explaining that we need a 15.7% decrease in carbon emissions each year in order to meet the Paris Climate Agreement's goals. Here's the thing. You don't actually reduce enough with offshore wind industry. But what's the actual harm? The National Resources Defense Coalition on October 12th of 2018 explains that we only have 20 years until it is nearly impossible to reverse the effects of climate change. Senator Mehrotra told you that this current Congress is more progressive than normal, so we should take advantage of that. But that is why you fail, to take advantage of this progressive Congress and to pass legislation that is actually effective. That's why the negation outweighs, because we achieve any impacts of climate change on the negation. That's why you failed today's legislation. But then true or false? We can reach a better solution on the negation. This one's easy, so I'm going to give it to you right away. The answer is true. Senator O'Connell and Fang then championed the ideal that we get to pass legislation today, and then later on, we'll work towards better legislation and then repeal this one. There's the problem with that. Let's contest them at their highest ground and see why that point at the end just doesn't exist. We can accept this bill as a temporary solution in preparation for renewable energy. That will become our perpetual reality. Here's why. Senator Crowley asked Senator Noonan, is it worth it to pass today's legislation? The answer is no, because we create congressional complacency. The most important thing to understand in today's debate is we only have one chance to pass the right policy. You don't do that on the affirmation. Because Angela Davis, a long-term political activist and professor at UCSC on August 26th of 2020 explains that this current climate has become a way that we have time to bring about deep change, radical change. But this Congress only has a certain amount of political capital. You waste it all on today's legislation. Instead, fail to pass new legislation. But the idea that we can just repeal today's resolution doesn't exist. Because let's contest the entire affirmation one more time. How do we know that Congress won't address the issue later? Because Policy Agenda's project at the University of Texas explains on November 5th of 2018 that committees need to consider legislation less than ever right now. Because by 2015 and 2016, the numbers that the House and Senate contested legislation plummeted to 254 times for the House and 69 times for the Senate. We won't revote on this issue. You don't achieve any impacts on the affirmation. You fail today's legislation to pass better ones later on to make sure that we actually better climate change. So true or false? The negation one. It's very simple. True.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. All questioners, raise your placards now. Senator Bugiamas.
Hi, okay, so is there any funding allocation in this resolution?
No, there isn't.
So we're not necessarily committed to funding a certain amount of wind energy. What if we pass climate policy in the future that partially incorporates wind energy? Isn't it good that we have this resolution?
Congress, once we pass one piece of legislation, never go back to pass another one.
I don't know about you, Senator, but I plan on going back to legislation and passing comprehensive.
I individually do, but like past trends have shown that this Congress doesn't. I give you quantifiable.
Does legislation like provisionally stop us from passing future legislation?
No, because we only have a certain amount of political capital. Something you.
Senator Mehrotra.
So you based your negative argument on the idea that wind energy is going to increase costs. Basically, let's go to basic economics. When you increase the number of suppliers in an industry, doesn't that decrease the price of the product?
I'm sure, but the basis of that argument was the fact that in the ocean, it's much, much more expensive to actually.
But because there's no one in the industry right now. When you bring the government into the industry, it changes things, right?
You have companies in the industry right now in Rhode Island.
But that's very few. The government gets to be a competitor too, right?
And with that, the cross-examination time has elapsed. Speaker and questioners, please mute yourselves. We've now reached the 8-speech cap on this legislation, and we'll move forward to hear final remarks from our author, Senator O'Connell. You have the floor.
Hi, I'm still at the leisure of my judges, Parley and Pio. Any indication when you guys are ready? Also still timing myself.
Just for your knowledge, Senator O'Connell, I do have different time cards, and I will notify you when you have 1 minute remaining and 30 seconds remaining.
Okay, thank you. Before the end of today's debate, I was really convinced that I actually understood the concerns of the negation until I realized in the last speech that they fall all to the affirmative. Let's look at two main points of contention within today's debate. The first being cost. Understand that the cost is a short-term problem that solves the long-term climate crisis. Almost every representative on the negation has brought you this concern. Representative Vicaria told you last speech that this legislation is a temporary solution, but understand that that's a good thing. After we pass today, we're able to implement a bill with fund allocations to things like research developments or simply a less harmful implementation mechanism that Representative Mangalik is so concerned about. If it ends up not working, we can ultimately get rid of it. At the point at which the negation is only bringing you the same argument over and over again and it can be solved with research and development and fund allocations, then the argument just doesn't work anymore. But the second main point of contention is the idea of jobs and job loss. Representatives such as Representative Aniceto and others on the negation have told you that jobs are going to decrease with the offshore wind industry. Everyone in this debate can understand that employment is a big issue. When we implement energy efficient and climate conscious measures like that of today's legislation, we create job opportunities because people have to actually build these offshore wind turbines. Now more than ever, our constituents need as many job opportunities as they can get, given the recession that we're in. The negation seems to have forgotten the largest impact of today's debate being our constituents, the ones most impacted with more jobs and the climate crisis worsening.
Thank you for that final statement. We will now move forward. Are there any motions? Senator Marotra?
I believe we've already moved to previous question, but just in case, I move to previous question.
All right. We're now moving forward to previous question. All those in favor of passing this legislation, please raise your placards. All right. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 on the affirmative. All those who wish to fail? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Senator Mangalik, did you? All right, I will switch that. We have 5 passing, 6 failing, which would mean 0 abstaining. Just to double check. All right. Senator Mangalik, I've switched your vote. No worries. Okay, so with a vote of 5 to 6 to 0, this bill unfortunately does not pass. My condolences to Senator O'Connell. We're now moving forward. Are there any other motions? Senator Mangalik?
For a 5-minute recess.
Carr, second. All in favor? Assuming unanimous consent, we'll now move forward to a 5-minute recess. It is currently 5:31. We'll be back at 5:36.
I don't want to eat up at everybody's recess time, but I just want to ask, do you think we are going to get to the national mask mandate?
I don't know. This 8 cap speech thing is ruining my day.
Yeah. Like, I'm trying to get 2 speeches in. I feel like that's all of our goal.
I would like 1.
Yeah.
Right now, only 3, Marotra, McIntyre, and Smith don't have speeches, but I know McIntyre is the author of the next legislation. So if the remaining senators want to do a split to make sure everyone can speak on what side they are prepared to speak on, we can continuously keep moving forward and even debate on the 3rd bill.
I was hoping to maybe do a first negation on the mask mandate.
We'll see if we get there. We'll just see if time allows and if we have time.
I do hope that me and Smith can get at least our 1 speech in.
Is there like a pretty even split for the next?
Before the ending time posted. So like we're not going to be able to end early.
Okay, so which side are you for? Like Smith?
Me, I'm negation.
Okay, sounds good.
If Noonan wants to give first neg though, it doesn't bother me.
Is this for mask mandate or hand-me-downs?
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, I thought you were talking about masks. I was talking about hand-me-downs.
Yeah. I'm not planning on speaking on hand-me-downs just to give people a chance because I was planning on speaking on mask mandate. But yeah.
With just 1 minute left in our recess, I just wanted to get back on and remind all senators that we will be resuming debate in just a few seconds. So here is your reminder to rejoin and turn on your camera so I can take a quick head count.
And I just wanted to clarify, I went back and looked at the rules. After you've hit the 8 speech cap, you just automatically move to previous question. There's no need to call for one. If it's before the 8 speech cap, then obviously you would need a motion.
There has been some confusion in my last round, so I just wanted to make sure I'm hearing all motions, but I will continue with that forward.
Yeah, what you did was fine. And as for a hard stop at 6:40, I have message tab and I will let you know.
All right, it is now 5:36. Apologize if my time is slow. I am currently in the West Coast. I don't know how to do math. I apologize. All right, looks like everyone is here and all of our judges are here, so we can start right back where we left off. All right, moving forward with the next item on our legislation, which is the Department of the Defense hand-me-downs. Do we have an authorship? Senator McIntyre, you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Senator McIntyre speaking for the first time this session. I'll begin with just any indication from all my judges. All right. The common saying goes, hindsight is 20/20. And it's clear now that the Department of Defense's 1033 program is no longer fulfilling its original purpose. So let's look back at the 1033 program and the problems with it, and then why this legislation solves them. The National Defense Authorization Act of 1997 granted permanent authority to the Secretary of Defense to transfer defense material to federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. This allows these agencies to acquire property for law enforcement purposes, particularly those associated with counter-drug and counterterrorism activities. And as of June 2020, there are around 8,000 federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies from over 49 states and 4 US territories that are participating in this program. Now, there is a bit of confusion, though, on how much equipment this program has actually provided to law enforcement. So using the initial acquisition values, we can see that the total amount transferred since the program's inception in 1997 is about $7.4 billion. Now, on January 16th of 2015, President Obama issued Executive Order 13688, the Federal Support for Local Law Enforcement Equipment Acquisition. This order did multiple things, but the critical part of it established a prohibited list of equipment that government programs could not provide to law enforcement. Equipment on the prohibited list included things such as tracked armored vehicles, weaponized aircraft, vessels, and other vehicles. Of these prohibited items, the 1033 program had transferred only 3 item types to authorized law enforcement agencies, and all of these were recalled and returned by April 1st of 2016. So what's the issue here? Well, on August 28th of 2017, the Trump administration issued a presidential executive order on restoring state, tribal, and local law enforcement's access to life-saving equipment and resources. It revoked Executive Order 1368 and directed all executive departments and agencies to cease implementing those recommendations and, if necessary, to take prompt action to rescind any rules, regulations, guidelines, or policies implementing them. This action taken by the president has allowed for military equipment transfers to law enforcement to resume, and this has become a major issue as of late. NBC reporting on June 20th of 2020 found that there were at least 29 instances where military-style vehicles that belong to local police departments have been used to confront protesters since George Floyd's death on May 25th, and at least 17 of these vehicles were obtained through the 1033 program. This militarization of law enforcement is not only inciting more violence and tensions in the nation, but it's harming the relationship between law enforcement and local communities. My legislation solves for this because we stop the 1033 program from increasing the tensions, violence, and unrest that has plagued our country by striking it from the National Defense Authorization Act of 1977. And then we ensure that these problems don't arise in the future. Senators, pass this legislation to promote unity, safety, and trust throughout our nation.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Connell.
Hi, Representative. So what exactly does the 1033 program give to different police departments?
So as I stated in my speech, it can give them different types of military vehicles.
Right. So is it just like military related things that they're getting?
There are some other things that they do get. However,
right. So why can't we pass a different piece of legislation so that we can reform the program, because we've seen reform happen before?
Actually, what we need to do is entirely strike it. And if we want to have it so that we give equipment that's actually beneficial, we can add something on to the end of that.
Senator Vicaria.
So what has the 1033 program done in the past to reduce crime rates?
So the 1033 program has allowed police departments to actually get equipment that can help them fight crime. However, we see that now they're using it in ways that it was not originally intended to be used for, such as intimidating protesters.
Can I ask a question? Thank you. So what other parts of the 1033 program help reduce crime rates? Why is repealing the whole thing the best solution?
As I stated, the 1033 program is providing equipment that we have seen like so many times.
Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Can you briefly explain to me the current Department of Defense bidding system for anything that they choose to buy?
Yeah, so essentially the Department of Defense, they have to use this bidding system, and most times it ends up where they're paying hundreds of dollars for something.
So a lot of times weapons, other materials are extremely expensive.
Yeah.
So this 1033 program was made so that we could keep using and recycling the expensive materials that we have been buying. Why would we stop a program that's benefiting our local police officers?
Because as I stated in my speech, we're seeing that this equipment is not used to provide as many benefits anymore.
Senator
Hi, so what's the real problem with the 1033 program?
The real problem with the 1033 program is the equipment that law enforcement is getting now is
it's not the military equipment. It's the fact that we don't have it's not the military equipment. It's the fact that we don't have oversight over that equipment. Isn't that just a simple change in the oversight committees that we use and not the equipment that we give them?
Actually, no, because we do have a significant amount of oversight over.
How do we have oversight over the Department of Defense?
We do have oversight over the Department of Defense. They are underneath our government.
How does this Congress have oversight?
The cross-examination time has elapsed. Both the speaker and questioners may be muted. Just a note, Senator Vicaria, seems as if your audio may have cut out and severely reduced during questioning, so Senator McIntyre continued to speak. I would recommend trying to see if you could fix that or project a little bit more when asking questions to prevent another.
Or I might have been, is it better now?
A little bit, yes.
Okay, I'll work on it. I'm so sorry, Senator McIntyre, I did not.
Totally fine, it's not your fault. Technology is unreliable. All right, moving forward, all those who wish to speak on the negation, please raise your placards now. Senator Smith, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Smith, speaking for the first time this legislative session, and I am going to start in just about 10 seconds here, unless I hear any judges yelling at me frantically because they are not quite ready yet. All right, and PO is all ready? Perfect. I hope you don't hear people screaming happy birthday. It's one of my cousin's birthdays, and my parents are yelling downstairs in the kitchen, so we'll see how that goes. All right. Hindsight may be 2020, but 2020 has been anything rather than what we expected. Much like the National Defense Authorization Act of 1997, it started off strong and was downhill from there. So let me explain to you why we don't throw out the baby in the bathwater and instead reform the act instead of repealing it entirely. First, because the act solved multiple issues, ones that are still being solved today. Second, because there's a safe way to recycle these expensive weapons. And finally, because of the rescue equipment that is given by this program. So first, the act originally solved the issue of the Department of Defense being able to buy too many things with their bid system. As I alluded to in questioning with Senator McIntyre, the DoD has an extremely poor bid system for how we acquire the majority of our weapons, materials, supplies, food, anything to fuel our soldiers. Now, just for an example, according to the Washington Post on May 17, 2019, the Department of Defense spent $830 on a single toilet seat in the Pentagon because of the current bid system. Now, while it would be a lot cheaper just to walk down to Menards and buy one for a couple dollars, that $830 toilet seat was shown that we have a horrible system for acquiring any type of weaponry or materials used within our government and Department of Defense. Now, that's imperative because we also spend an exorbitant amount on the weapons and materials that we use to combat our soldiers with. According to the Department of Defense in 2020, the current annual budget is over the next budgets of the combined 7 countries all put together. But our military has been ranked first in our effectiveness, but nearly last in our efficiency of our use of funds. This program was made to solve that. When first introduced, the idea was that any unused items would be recycled back to local police departments so that they would be able to use the expensive items that we had purchased for Department of Defense. The second part of this legislation, though, was that it's so that it could be accurately deconstructed so that any type of weapons wouldn't harm those trying to take them apart. So let's talk about some expensive military style weapons. If someone doesn't know how to properly recycle and reallocate the materials used in that weapon, it can cause a lot of net harms to the person who is trying to dismantle it. Instead, when we put it into the hands of trained police officers who know how to use these weapons and are able to utilize them in an effective way, it makes it so that not only are we saving money, but we are saving the cost of recycling and upkeeping these weapons. Now, second, let me talk to you about the let me talk to you about the rescue equipment that is included within this legislation. Since this legislation was enacted, only $7.4 billion of materials have been transferred between the Department of Defense back to the United States local law enforcement. And every single local police force that requires any type of weaponry has to have an open application for specifically what type they want, specifically when they are able to absorb it, and specifically what they are going to do to make sure that that weaponry does not get in the hands of any person who is not supposed to get it. But in August of 2017, that entirety was redundant because Donald Trump took that part of the act out of the station. We need to negate this legislation in order to help make our Department of Defense budget more expensive.
Senator Smith, I'm going to cut you off right there. Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 15 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator McIntyre.
So you said that we're saving money on the upkeep of equipment through this program, but are you aware that most of the equipment from this program is at least a decade old?
A lot of the equipment is old, yes, but the equipment still works. Just because it's 10 years old doesn't mean that it's no longer.
Okay, but is that equipment still the safest equipment to have our local law enforcement using?
So with the current evolutions that we have with like the materials for equipment that we use, we know how to use them. They are safe enough to use in the military. And while there may be safer options, those options are more expensive and reserved for military uses.
Senator Anacita.
Are police officers trained in how to use military grade weapons?
Yes, so before any of the local police departments are able to apply for the certain weapons to come to them, they have to prove that the persons within their unit are capable of using that weaponry without net harm.
Okay, sure. Even if they can use these weapons properly, what guarantees that they won't use them with the same kind of aggressiveness would they say use police grade weapons?
That's a great question. So what I was trying to get to within my speech, the Trump executive order in August 28th, 2017 was what allowed for the more violent weapons to be used during the protest. That is something that we can.
Senator Noonan.
But we don't. You cited all these intended effects of the section, but wouldn't you say that the powers given by the section have been historically abused?
No, I would say that the executive orders which have changed the original intent of the legislation is what have abused it. If we were to redact those, then it would make it so that the original intentions are still upheld.
Right. How feasible do you think it would be to do that?
With the next administration, very.
And do you think that that will at all stop police from misusing the things that we're giving them?
There's always going to be misuse of any type of resource that we have, but
Senator Crowley?
Yeah, so regardless of things like executive orders, why do local law enforcement agencies even need access to things like tanks in the first place?
That's a great question. So you can't discount executive orders within this legislation because the first time that any tank was made available to a local police department was in 2017 after President Donald Trump made that available to them. We have to redact these executive orders so that that's not something
they can have the access. Why do they need this access?
They're not necessary. They don't need them. I'm advocating for getting rid of the specific parts of the act that are making it more.
And with that, the cross-examination time has elapsed. Speaker and questioners may be muted. We're now going to move on to our next cycle. All those wishing to speak on the affirmative, raise your placards now. All affirmative speakers. Senator Pang, your bravery is recognized. You have the floor.
I'm sorry, my audio cut out. Did you recognize me? Okay, awesome. This is Senator Pang, spelled P-A-N-G, speaking for the second time today at the leisure of all. If I could just get any sign from my PO and judges. Awesome. I used to think that the Third Amendment, which prohibits the quartering of soldiers in civilian housing, was somewhat outdated. After all, what's the chance of you coming home, opening the door, and finding the 103rd Airborne in your living room? However, it's become much more relevant with police actions when they march up to our doors uninvited, wreak havoc upon our communities, and don't get any prosecution for it. Maybe we don't have military in our communities anymore, but we passed today's legislation to stop our police from becoming one. So first, pass this legislation because it improves police and community relations. Section 1 essentially removes military equipment from the law enforcement. Here's why that's important. An October 2019 study by the Department of Political Science at Yale University finds that whenever we demilitarize New Haven, Connecticut, there is an increase of public trust by 10%. So, Senator Maharocha, understand that it doesn't matter how much oversight we have over the 1033 program. When the police are constantly armed for battle, civilians don't feel safe. Now, more than ever, do our civilians need to be trusting the police. The crime report continues from John Jay College of Criminal Justice that whenever we saw public trust increase in the police, so did the reporting of crimes and assaults by 11%. Let's ensure that in the status quo, our people feel safe enough to go to the police with their problems so that when they're faced with assault and hate crimes, they can get the help that they need. But the second reason why we pass this legislation is in order to protect people of color, principally Black Americans. That's because this legislation effectively stops them from being targeted by military-grade weapons. Jonathan Mumolo from the Department of Political Science at Princeton University explains that whenever we saw a 10% increase of Black people in a community, there was an 11% increase in the militarization of police because police departments constantly view Black Americans as their enemies. This legislation solves for that and ensures that Black Americans aren't constantly facing the wrong end of a gun. A study done by Ryan Welk from the Department of Psychology at Stanford found back in June of 2017 that having the most militarization under the 1033 program would increase civilian deaths by police hands by 129%. This program is the reason why Black children are so afraid to go to the playground when they see a police officer with a rifle at their side. So yes, Senator Smith, the 1033 program saves us money at the price of American lives. I'm no longer willing to pay that cost, and neither should anyone else in today's chamber.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator O'Connell.
Hi, Representative. So how does today's legislation impact smaller police departments that are already underfunded?
Right. So I would argue that we need to be doing some weighing, right? We can repeal the 1033 program and then we can start—
Why are we going to completely repeal it whenever there's aspects of it that aren't weapons that actually help smaller police departments?
Right. That's because there's another solution that doesn't come with the harms of 1033. Instead, we can just start funding or increase the money.
Why can't we pass a different piece of legislation like President Obama did with the executive order to just get rid of like the military stuff within the 1033 program?
Senator Smith.
So it was the executive orders that changed the original goal of the act, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The ones that increased the amount of violent weapons being able to be used, the ones that allowed bayonets, the ones that allowed tanks. So
Right.
Why don't we just take those back instead of throwing everything out with the executive order?
Right. That's because the 1033 program, the vast majority of the time, gives a lot of military equipment. So
the vast majority of the time since 2017.
So sure, even if we start outlawing the larger weapons, I would argue that even then, the smaller weapons are still going to be dangerous, right? At the end of the day,
And with that, the questioning time has elapsed. The speaker in question but may be muted. All right, moving forward, all those who wish to speak on the negation, please raise your placards now. Due to recency, that goes to Senator O'Connell.
I thank the chair. This is Representative O'Connell speaking for the second time in this session, still at the leisure of my judges, Parley and Pio, in the indication when you guys are ready. Also still timing myself. Is my last judge good? Today's policy closes a door for so many hardworking individuals who have dedicated their lives to protect and serve. After years of service, we don't want to see mass layoffs and job loss, especially whenever that is at its peak right now. We don't want hardworking individuals to go home hungry. Today's legislation harms those hardworking individuals. Principally, fail today's legislation because it ends up harming smaller police departments. With the removal of the 1033 program in Section 1, it completely abolishes every aspect of the program. We need to look at the benefits of this program aside from militarization. Brian Barrett, the digital director at Wired in June of this year, explains that it allows the Department of Defense to get rid of excess equipment by passing it off to local authorities. Much of that inventory is perfectly ordinary, including office equipment, clothing, tools, radios, and so on. But the haul also includes some of the so-called control equipment. This impacts smaller police departments that don't have enough funding. Whenever you get rid of the 1033 program, they have to pay for all of these basic necessities that a department needs out of pocket. NPR in January 2018 explains the harm of this. Many police chiefs say that low wages and part-time positions are consequences of inadequate funding. That means departments can't pay for ongoing training and they can't afford to fire problematic officers and don't have the capacity to investigate police shootings. Police departments that are lacking funds in the status quo are going to lose access to even more things with the removal of the 1033 program. Under today's legislation, when you abolish this program, they lose access to crucial necessities, which is why you're going to fail. But second, allow me to separate myself from Representative Smith whenever I talk about reform. Before President Trump allowed the 1033 to militarize again, we saw a significant decrease in crime. The Harvard Kennedy School and Shorenstein Center in 2017 explains that non-lethal equipment, including those office supplies and IT hardware I just talked about, have the largest effect on all types of crime. We saw a reduction of 7 crimes per 100,000 people, suggesting that these transfers help law enforcement agencies improve their efficiency. If you abolish this and don't open the door for reforms, crimes will increase and our constituents will be put at risk. But Representative McIntyre told you that reform can't happen under the 1033 program or if we pass today's legislation. Understand that this isn't true. Reform has happened and this legislation doesn't do that. That same article from The Wired furthers that in 2015, Barack Obama signed an executive order that prohibited state and local law enforcement from receiving certain types of properties like the grenade launchers and weaponized aircraft and problematic military weapons under the 1033 program. But Trump lifted those restrictions in 2017. Since Trump lifted those restrictions, we saw an increase in violence and aggression and police militarization. Today's legislation drags us away from implementing those reform efforts. Reform is clearly the better solution rather than abolishing the program completely. Stand with me and affirm or fail.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes. All those who wish to question, raise your placards now. Senator Beccaria.
Senator, so how does the DoD use the 1033 program to participate in excessive spending?
I'm not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure you can tell me.
I like the answer. So they do that. They use it as an excuse for excessive spending. What stops us from passing today's legislation, then taking that money we would save and reallocating it to underfunded police departments?
Right. So there's no way that we can actually ensure that's going to happen because underfunded police departments can't pay enough to their employees. So with the 1033 program, they're getting access to basic resources that they're not going to be able to afford without the program.
Why can't we take the money from abolishing the program and give it to these underfunded
Because it's not going to be enough because right now they can't fire problematic police officers because they don't have enough money.
So do you think it's inherently problematic for any piece of legislation to be so easily abused by a president simply lifting restrictions?
Yes.
So since this section allows that to happen, why should we continue abiding by it?
Right. So I'm saying that with the next administration, i.e. like the Biden administration, we can possibly try to pass reform that gets rid of the militarization aspect of the 1033 program.
Right, but that's no guarantee that another administration will come along and just add it right back, right?
Well, I mean, Joe Biden worked with President Obama. He probably has like very similar views in
Not
terms of
Joe Biden.
militarized
As
police.
the questioning time has elapsed, both speaker and questioner may be muted. Seeing as that was a speech on the negation, all affirmative speakers, please raise your placards now. Senator Anacita, you have the floor. Oh, Senator Mongolic?
Point of inquiry?
Yes.
I believe it's an affirmative speech.
Is that not what I said? I said affirmative. All right, no worries. Okay, once again, all those who wish to speak on the affirmative, please raise your placards now. Senator Anacita, you still have the floor.
This is Senator Anacito speaking for the second time in today's session. With any indication from judges, I'll begin. In this chamber, we're blessed to see a large variety and diversity among our very own Congress members. However, it's now our responsibility to reflect back to our civilians, because among protests and violence erupting across our country, it's time that we finally acknowledge the systemic problems plaguing our police departments and pass today's legislation. First, in order to reduce violence within police action, when we fight police militarization, police become less of a threat during missions. But let's look at past precedent to see how putting military-grade weapons in the hands of people who are armed with legal protections end up boosting violence. As Carrie L. Byron writes for Reuters in June of 2020, that out of 200,000 warrants issued every single year in which police officers end up storming civilian homes, it resulted in the deaths of over 39 people, especially including police using military-grade weapons, putting both police officers and civilians in danger. Senator Smith, even if we train police officers to use military-grade weapons, their aggressions remain exactly the same. In fact, they even conceded in cross-examination that we don't have the kind of regulations that protect groups like protesters in Portland from military weapons if presidents like the Trump administration continue to crack down. Because whenever someone is barging into your home with no context or not even a knock, violence erupting is not a surprise. Because the American Civil Liberties Union, a nonprofit organization, writes in their 2014 analysis that out of 61% of drug-related raids in which police officers used heavily militarized weapons, 1/3 of those people ended up being found innocent. When we're using violence and terror as a ways to crack down on communities that are already criminalized, it's time that we pass today's legislation and remove militarized weapons from the hands of police officers bent on harming communities. Next, pass today's legislation because of a systemic lack of transparency within 1033 legislation. Newsweek writes in 2014 that even though we have the regulations to track equipment sent through 1033, it hasn't been effective. In fact, in places like St. Louis County, hundreds of guns and other weapons have been funneled to other areas. Senator O'Connell, you're absolutely right. Having missing walkie-talkies isn't our problem. It's when police officers are able to take weapons in other such facilities and take them to other places, that's our problem. In fact, as the National Academy of Sciences writes in a 2018 analysis, we saw that whenever there was a 10% increase in the amount of African Americans in a certain area, we saw a 10.53% increase in the militarization of police within those areas. The problem within today's legislation comes to a systemic problem within our communities. It's time we pass today's legislation and change that narrative.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Bugiamas?
Hi, okay, so let's address your concern about oversight. Is lack of oversight inherent to the 1033 program? Like, is there anything in there saying that we can't attach conditions?
It's not that we don't have a regulation saying we can't have transparency. It's that we have regulations and transparency hasn't been happening.
Right. Okay. So there's always a way to increase regulation and oversight, whether it's through acquiring information or through.
Because 1033 is a joint program between federal and state and local departments, it becomes a lot harder for us to track how weapons and other equipment directly go through each individual.
Crowley?
It's not just weapons.
Okay, so how does the American public respond when they see police departments becoming less powerful?
That's not the problem. When police departments have more power and are more militarized, that's when citizens become more scared, like Senator Pang said in her speech,
Right.
or become more threatened.
More scared. What do they do when they are more scared?
When they become more scared, they're scared to report crimes. They're scared to go into their communities when they have police officers out with guns.
Also buy their own guns?
Okay, if you're going off of self-protections, having police officers are a literal point for self-enforcement.
And with that, the cross-examination time has ended. Both speaker and questioners, please mute yourselves now. Moving forward, we're now going to move on to a negation speech. All those who wish to speak on the negation, please raise your placards now. Senator Mehrotra, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. That's Senator Divya Mehrotra, spelled Mehrotra. I always hold it up. It's a little bit of a harder name to spell, just being an Indian name. Give me a smile or nod whenever you're ready. Great. As usual, just because Zoom is harder, it minimizes itself. Just let me, PO, just let me know if everyone's ready. That'd be awesome.
I believe all our judges are ready at your first word.
Thank you. When it comes to assigning blame in this Congress, we always choose the equipment over the people. I mean, you can see it from representatives on the affirmation. Representative Anacito's and Pang's entire argument rests on the idea that it's the military equipment that kills everyone, not the police departments that have allowed terrible mismanagement to just root itself in every individual. Let's focus on how to reform police departments instead of just ruining individuals. So we're starting to approach the end of this debate. So let's kind of break it down into two big ideas. This first is, what does the 1033 program really kind of engage with? You start with Representative O'Connell in cross-examination with Representative McIntyre. She argues that most material is actually beneficial, providing evidence from the actual law enforcement offices that give them the equipment, proving that it's mostly just office material. But what's the impact of just giving office material? It creates connections between federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, allowing them to maneuver themselves for counterterrorism operations and further national security operations. That's the impact that you have to weigh. So when Representative Anacito and Noonan in cross-examination just fearmonger about the military equipment that we're sending them, that it's as if it's 99.99999% of the equipment that we give them, don't let them fearmonger. Establish today's legislation based on the true impacts that Representative O'Connell gives you. Weigh the reality that we can create cooperation between federal and state agencies against any fear-mongering that doesn't have value to it. But next is this idea of reforming over abolishment in today's legislation. That's kind of the main advocacy of the negation. Let's break down how each person has approached this idea. So let's start off with Representative McIntyre. She misidentifies the problem in the first place. It isn't the equipment itself. It's actually that the equipment hasn't been tracked, something that I talked to her about in cross-examination. But she avoided the cross-ex, saying that there are no ways to increase oversight. Here are a couple of ways that Representative Anacito also needs to know. First is the Department of Defense Oversight Committee that we have within Congress. Second is Inspector Generals. Third is by using the Government Accountability Office that we have. That's quantified best by Anna Gunderson of Louisiana State University in 2019, where she explained by using all three of these methods, you increase oversight over a program that only really needs that oversight. But then turn to Representative Pang, who also continues this fear-mongering, acting as if the 1033 program in its totality is predatory. Let's challenge that assumption and the entirety of the AFS assumption. Vincent Bose in 2017 from the University of Warwick quantifies that despite a small total effect, the program is actually quite cost-effective and actually leads to a drop of about $112,000 in the social costs of crimes. That just means you're decreasing crimes. Instead of just accepting Representative Anacito and Pang's entire arguments of, hey, I mean, the police suck, fail today's legislation, reform first.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. All questioners, please rise or raise your placards.
Hi.
That goes to Senator Pang.
Okay, so I can agree that the vast majority of the police would use the 1033 program to protect people. My issue is with the few that abuse it. What's
Sure.
stopping police officers from using their qualified immunity and getting away with the misuse of these weapons?
Sure, there is nothing preventing us from actually passing the bill that we just debated on qualified immunity. There's
Okay.
nothing preventing us.
Okay, hold on. Did we get rid of qualified immunity?
My Senate actually passed it.
Senator Anacito.
Hi.
Is solving systemic racism or systemic violence as easy as just passing a regulation?
It's oftentimes when we do comprehensive legislation. So that means crafting the perfect piece of legislation.
But solving a systemic problem can't be solved by just one piece of legislation.
It's also not solved by abolishing a program. I hope you understand that too.
Right, but if we abolish a program that enables that systemic problem.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, because your oversight, the lack of oversight enables that. You can continue. Yeah.
And with that, the cross-examination time has ended. Speakers and questioners, please mute your mics now. We'll now move forward to our fourth and final cycle for this legislation. All those who wish to speak on the affirmative, raise your placards now. Once again, all those who wish to speak on the affirmative, raise your placards now. This is the final round, so if anyone does have an affirmative speech, I would recommend for them to do it right now in order to prevent a break in debate. Senator Bugiamas, are you speaking or?
All right, that's Senator Bugiamas speaking for the last time and pretty unexpectedly for today. If I can just get an indication when my judges are not ready. Oh, okay, awesome. Okay, let me just pull up the doc because I did not expect this. Okay. A lot of notable things have happened during the 104th Congress. Republicans gained control of both houses for the first time since 1954. The U.S. government shut down in both November and December, and most significant to this to the 114th Congress, the 1033 program was established. Now, I don't think we're going to see any more parallels in the legislation that we passed today beyond this one, but after several cycles of debate, I'm sure we're all ready for a shutdown. But today, I asked Congress to power through and pass today's piece of legislation. The first thing we have to understand in today's round is that the intent of 1033 doesn't matter. We've seen it implemented in the past. Senator Pang, McIntyre, and Anacito all tell you about the negative impacts of police militarization, and that doesn't go away unless you repeal 1033. Because the problem is that today, the negation has been shifting their focus away from the police departments that misuse them. But it's precisely because of these police departments that you have to repeal this act to ensure that none of these police departments can be militarized, because the cost of militarization are way too much. The General Accountability Office, in fact, had a sting operation in 2017 where the agency's false police officers were able to obtain $1.2 million worth of military gear from the Defense Department to the 1033 program. A fake police department was able to access millions of dollars in gear from the DoD. That doesn't go away just because we add regulations. In fact, it didn't, because even when the Defense Logistics Agency implemented additional controls in wake of this report, confidence was still lessened. And that in itself is a problem, because trust with the police is equally as important on how they use this gear. Chris Joyner and Nick Thime of the Atlantic Journal-Constitution analyzed decades of records across 651 Georgia police departments and sheriff's offices. They found that departments that took more than $1,000 in 1033 money on average fatally shot about 4 times as many people as those who don't. So we see the problem in itself with police departments accessing this material, killing more individuals than those who don't. But on top of that, distrust with the police is a problem in itself. The report published in 2018 by the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences found that merely seeing militarized units can erode public confidence in law enforcement and give off the impression that a police department is overfunded. Now is not the time to increase distrust between civilians and police officers. When these weapons aren't being misused, murdering our constituents, they erode public trust of law enforcement, making police encounters with the public more difficult and unstable. So those on the negation, I ask you that if it's worth to continue these things with no guarantee that they'll go away unless you pass today's legislation. The affirmation 100% wins today's debate. Don't let the passion of the negation keep you from being pragmatic and pass.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 55 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Senator Mongolick.
Hi, Senator. Do police departments get their weapons only through the 1033 program, like their military weapons?
Well, they can apply for a surplus, so it's regardless of whether oh yeah, go ahead.
You can purchase them through the 1122 program. So if police officers can still buy military equipment, how are we addressing your concerns?
Yeah, so they get them for free from the 1033. So they're definitely able to access a lot more and for a lot less of a cost. So
why are we still allowing them to buy them? Like, what is the reason to fall short?
Sorry, the internet. I'm happy to pass legislation in the future that makes sure that they can't buy.
Senator McIntyre.
I rescinded my question.
Oh, all right. All questioners, please put it back up. All right. Senator Marotra.
Hi, so I predicated my entire speech on this idea that it's not the military equipment itself, it's the lack of oversight. So what's the inherent harm with just keeping a program, but increasing it through the 3 means that I gave you?
Right, okay, so you explained in your speech how like we need perfectly crafted legislation to implement that.
That wasn't questioning, but sure.
Okay, in your questioning, right. In the meantime, our constituents are still suffering the
they're not dying right now, let's be honest. It's mostly
I explained to you in my speech how Georgia police departments that access 1033 programs were more likely.
One police department, and Representative O'Connell outweighed that with
to show you that it's possible.
With that, the cross-examination time has ended.
I think that's
Sure, thanks you. We'll now move forward to our 8th and final speech for this legislation. All those who wish to speak on the negation, raise your placards now. Due to recency, that does go to Senator Crowley. Senator Crowley, you have the floor.
That's Senator Crowley speaking for the second and last time today. Any indication when you're ready would be great.
1 second.
All right. This summer, Americans flooded the streets protesting their friends and family being killed in the streets. Their cry for racial justice was met with All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. It is incredible to me how this bill would unite both sides of the protests in strong opposition. Anything with that power should be failed immediately. I want to start with an important clarification. Everyone on the affirmation tells you that Program 1033 is abused by local law enforcement. What they don't tell you is that it also has a system to prevent that very abuse. When police departments misuse weapons, their access to them ends. Aaron Davenport tells Rand Corporation in 2018 that from 2014 to 2016, 282 police departments were terminated from accessing this program. As soon as misuse occurs, we hold departments accountable. It's on us to do that throughout these protests. But moving beyond that, I want to set a framework as the literal last speaker. Evaluate this round on 2 things: civilian deaths and racism. Senators O'Connell, Smith, and Marotra on my own side argue for reform, but the negation has to defend the program as it exists now, as Senator Bugiamis points out. I will take the affirmation at their highest ground and prove why repealing the current program makes both much worse. When cities shrink their police departments and demilitarize, people feel unsafe and buy their own guns. This is already happening as defunding the police grows in popularity. Dalvin Brown tells USA Today on June 3rd of 2020 that firearm sales have gone up 602% since the beginning of this pandemic. When people even think that the police will have less power, they buy guns. There are 3 impacts of more civilian gun ownership. First, more Americans will die. A 2014 review from the Annals of International Medicine said that owning a gun doubles your risk of becoming murdered and triples the risk of suicide. I will always prioritize that impact in any debate. Fail on that alone. But second, more police will die as well. Derek Thompson tells the Atlantic, June 19th of 2020, that a 10% increase in civilian firearm ownership causes 10 additional officer homicides. Regardless of what side of the protest you stand on, you cannot support a bill that puts both the people and the police directly in the line of fire. But third, more police brutality. Harvard School of Public Health says on October 11th of 2018 that US states with high levels of gun ownership have more fatal shootings by police than states with lower gun prevalence. That's because the police feel more threatened and are more likely to pull their weapon. It comes as no surprise to anyone in this room that that increased number of fatal shootings disproportionately hurts minorities. Senators McIntyre, Pang, Aniceto, and Bugiamis tell you this bill increases trust. When police and people of color are being murdered at even higher rates, I find it very hard to believe trust does anything but go up in flames. Senator McIntyre, this bill certainly unites the American public. It unites them against this bill in fear for their lives fail.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 11 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. All right, we will start with Senator McIntyre.
So are people already fearing for their lives because of this military style equipment that the law enforcement has?
More so when you take them away.
Okay, but is protester intimidation something that is going to disqualify these law enforcement agencies from participating in the 1033 program?
Okay, so that's up to us to enforce, but I'm saying the program as it exists.
How are we going to enforce that? Is that something that we can feasibly do?
I mean, yeah, that's up to you and me. We're Congress, we enforce.
Well, okay, but how are we going to ensure that we're stopping all protester intimidation when it's rampant across the entire US?
You can't stop that with any policy, and this bill certainly doesn't do that.
Senator Pang.
Hey, where is the vast majority of police brutality concentrated?
I'm sure you can tell me.
In low-income areas or in communities of color. So, doesn't that mean that the chances are very high that people in those areas have already armed themselves against the police?
Okay, yeah, that's not a reason why like everyone arming themselves and everyone at high risk of death is a good thing.
Will there be more instances of violence in higher income?
And with that, the cross-examination time has ended.
Pass.
We'll now move forward with our next, well, we have reached our final cycle of this legislation. It will now be followed by a 1 minute, 30-second last appeal by our author, Senator McIntyre. Senator, you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Senator McIntyre speaking for the second time today. I'll begin with just any indication from all my judges.
1 second.
All judges ready? All right. Senators, we've heard many strong arguments from both the affirmation and the negation throughout this debate. But now I'll end this debate the very way that I started, looking back, only this time on the main arguments of this debate and why the affirmation conclusively wins. Now, first, let's talk about the main point of the affirmation, the safety and lives of Americans. As senators, our job is to represent our constituents to the best of our abilities. And as the affirmation has proven, the 1033 program allows for this equipment to be used in ways that do not fall in line with the program's original intent, and they're used in ways to intimidate our citizens. When we pass this legislation, we ensure that further equipment from the Department of Defense's 1033 program doesn't fall into the hands of the law enforcement that is already shown that they have a lack of discretion of when to use this equipment that is excessive and intimidating. But then the negation claims that we need this equipment for necessary responsibilities of law enforcement. And it is true that law enforcement agencies can provide some benefits with this equipment. However, we need to weigh the tangible and intangible effects of this program. So let's look at the tangible effects. The increased violence, especially against people of color, intimidation of protesters, and the militarization of our law enforcement. Then the intangible effects, increased distrust, fear, and tensions between our communities and law enforcement. These harms far outweigh any of the positive benefits that the negation can offer you today. But still, the negation claims that reform is a better option because the issue with this is—
Senator, I'm going to cut you off there. You have reached your 90-second limit for your final appeal. We will now move forward with previous question voting. All those in favor of passing this legislation, please raise your placards now. Thank you, Representative Noonan, for that amazing enthusiasm. I loved that. All right, that is 1, 2, 3, 4 on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the affirmative. And we have how many on the Negation? All right, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any abstaining? It should be 0. With a vote of 5 to 6 to 0, this bill unfortunately does not pass. My condolences to Senator McIntyre. Any motions?
Before we have any motions for any recess, I have spoken to Tab Room. We want to try to keep it as close to 6:40 as possible. Please try to limit any recesses. There are still 6 speakers, I believe, who have not given 2 speeches.
All right, with that comment in mind, any motions? All right. If there are any motions or personal inquiries, please place them in the chat. I am still consistently checking to make sure. All right, moving forward, we will now begin debate on the third item on our docket, which is the mask mandate legislation. Since we do not have an author, are there any sponsorships? All right, due to recency, that does go to Senator Mongolic.
I thank the chair, that's Senator Mongolic, and I'll begin with a thumbs up for my judges and PO. All right, all good. Today, over 1,000 Americans will die from COVID-19. We must remember how badly COVID-19 has destroyed each and every one of our communities, and today affirm to save American lives. Because Quartz found just 5 hours ago that studies have resulted in the fact that 130,000 lives will be saved by March if mask use is increased, and the pandemic's closure will be vastly accelerated. That is principally why we must affirm today, because the scientists think that we should do it. The New York Times explains in October of 2020 that top public health experts agree that the most effective measure at this point against the pandemic is a national mask mandate. Dr. Fauci, the nation's favorite scientist, is particularly strong in his support. And President-elect Joe Biden has made a national mask mandate a key part of his campaign. But legal scholars doubt that the president's executive authority extends to a national mask mandate, meaning that if we rely on Joe Biden's ability to put on this mandate, there's a slight chance that it might not happen at all. That's why we must affirm today, because not only will we be going into action 2 months earlier, but we will be saving those lives and preventing any of the legal issues that could be arising if we leave it to Mr. Biden. But let's put the burden on the negation to prove that today's legislation is so disastrous that in the 2 months that it could save lives, we need to wait until Biden tries to do it himself. But second, realize that today's legislation is essential for changing the culture nationally about mask mandates. Kaiser Health News explains last month that in some Florida communities, only 1/5 of those in public spaces are using masks. And NPR in October of 2020 explains why. In several states, leadership has refused to enforce statewide mandates, saying that they don't have the constitutional authority. This is why in Florida, the situation has been so terrible, and the pandemic will continue to worsen. More American lives will be lost unless we choose to take action now. At the end of the day, realize that by passing a national mask mandate, we will be concretely saving American lives by decreasing the spread of the pandemic and ensuring that it goes away quicker than it would otherwise.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 38 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. That goes to Senator Smith.
Thank you. Does this legislation have any consequences if someone does not wear their mask?
It will work with the states to develop enforcement procedures.
Okay, so do we know what type of enforcement procedures we are allowed to do to mandate what people are wearing?
Well, since this has the authority of Congress, presumably we could do fines, small sorts of penalties like that.
Okay, if we were to do that, do you think that people who oppose national mask mandates would be more vocal, especially with the polarization in our country after this election?
Senator Noonan.
How necessary is immediate action to solve the issue of COVID-19?
Very necessary.
All right, so if this legislation today is unconstitutional and gets immediately bogged down in legal review, you would say that this legislation is problematic, right?
No, I don't agree. First of all, I don't agree that it's unconstitutional. Legal scholars have said that Congress has the authority to do so. But second, even if it is found to be unconstitutional by the court, we need to take every opportunity we can to stop this pandemic.
Right, but does this legislation, right, you say that legal experts say
Senator
that.
Crowley?
Okay, so isn't there currently a mask shortage among medical professionals?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah, so there might be a medical mask shortage, but there's not a shortage of general masks.
Okay, I really
was
hope
not
someone
reviewed.
on the negation can test that. But anyway, if they are at the most risk, should we pass and further restrict the supply if they don't have enough masks right now?
Public health scholars have all agreed that everybody needs to be wearing a mask. So if there
Yeah,
is a
like
shortage,
if the
we should-
supply was there, if we had enough masks, that's a great idea.
No, but everybody should be wearing them, and there is the manufacturing capacity in the United States.
Senator Bujiama's last question.
Hi, okay, so I agree with you. We definitely do need a mask mandate, but what about accessibility to masks for maybe elderly individuals who can't go out and purchase them? What does this legislation do about accessibility to masks?
It should do more. You're definitely right. But after we pass today's legislation, there's nothing stopping us from extending programs.
Penalize people who don't have access to masks under today's legislation, right? There's no additional mechanisms to ensure they have them.
There is actually a provision in the bill that says that people won't be penalized if they're not able to use them.
And with that, the cross-examination period has ended. Both speakers and questioners, please mute yourselves now. We'll now move forward with our next negation speaker. All those who wish to speak on the neg, please raise your placards now. Senator Noonan, you have the floor.
I thank the chair. My name is Senator Noonan, speaking for the second time today on the negation. And is anybody not ready?
Give me 1 second.
Okay. All right. Okay, saying at face value that I'm against a bill to enact a national mask mandate might turn a few heads. So let me make a few things clear. Masks save lives, and every American should wear them. And I think that the federal government should take whatever actions it can to ensure that. The problem today is that this legislation is very likely unconstitutional and would be immediately legally challenged. When lives are on the line, we have no time to waste. We must fail today to come up with a better solution. First, historical precedence has shown us that both the executive and Congress cannot force Americans to wear masks as provided in this bill, Senator Mangalik. This is a right given by the states to see how we investigate previous court decisions. According to CNN, professor in constitutional law Josh Blackman cautions that a congressional mandate could be subject to constitutional review. Even as Congress enacted a statute that said everyone must wear a mask, I don't think that statute would be constitutional. I don't think Congress has the power to force people to wear masks anywhere at any point in time. We have the Obamacare case from a couple years ago. That case held that people can't be forced to buy insurance. And I think in a similar world, people can't be forced to put a mask on their face by the federal government. States can, not the federal government. The reason that we cannot pass this legislation is the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, which allows Congress to regulate commerce among the states. This clause is the only way we could have the right to force Americans to wear masks. As seen in the Obamacare case, even if it may benefit Americans, that falls outside of our powers as Congress. So what happens if we pass? It immediately gets legally challenged, as it should be, because the president shows us that this bill is unconstitutional. The problem with that, the unique negative impact you get from that, is that we are seeing 1,000 deaths a day, as Senator Mangalik already told you. We don't have time to pass an unconstitutional piece of legislation that is going to get bogged down immediately in legal review. So do we have an alternative? Yes, we do. Now let's look at what we as a Congress can do. According to Health Affairs, a federal mandate could include budgetary incentives for states to encourage adoption. More specifically, states that mandate masks could receive financial incentives to promote masking policy and messaging to encourage mask wearing. This approach is not dissimilar to incentives that have been used to encourage states to not just pass seatbelt laws, but ensure its high compliance with those laws. So we as a Congress may not be able to force states to impose a mask mandate or oppose a federal mask mandate, but what we can do is provide financial incentives. These financial incentives encourage states to use those mask mandates. And in the past, those have been effective. You see that with the seatbelt laws, and you see that with the national age to drink alcohol, which is 21. So when we see that we have a viable alternative to make sure that every American is going to be wearing a mask, it makes no sense to pass legislation in front of us when I have already shown that it is unconstitutional. Senators, we have the opportunity here to save lives. As Senator Monglik already told you, why are we wasting it on a bill that is unconstitutional? And why are we wasting it when we know that there is already a much more viable alternative? We must negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 4 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. Wow. All right. Senator Monglik, you have the floor.
Hi, Senator. So the CNN source that you cited, they said that it may be subject to constitutional review, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so they didn't say that it's just outright unconstitutional.
They
What's your
said,
opinion?
well, he did say that as an expert in constitutional law, he said it would probably be unconstitutional, and he
Probably,
cited
but we
precedent.
don't know.
That's important.
But there's no like objectively.
Sure.
Like,
In
there's no,
any case, when we're talking about legal precedent, we don't know for sure, but we can look at legal precedent.
So
When
if
courts
there's a-
ruled that the Congress cannot force people to have
Senator
insurance.
O'Connell.
Hi, Representative. So how effective have like local and state level mask mandates been?
I believe they have not been as effective because they are
Right. So how can we ensure that the financial incentive is actually going to want to make states implement this if some states are better off than others in terms of money?
Because when we're instituting a financial incentive, it's going to be much more wide reaching than just letting states handle it themselves.
Right. So how is that oh, never mind. I rescind the time.
All right. Senator McIntyre.
So does our government actually have the financial capacity to incentivize the use of masks?
I'd say that we can find a way because lives are the most important issue in this debate.
Okay, but haven't we also been trying to give more financial stimulus, but we haven't been able to actually afford that?
Right. I once again still think there are places in the budget where we can cut from because the COVID-19 pandemic, it's the #1 priority right now. I think we can do both.
If we can't even afford financial stimulus for our constituents who need it the most, then how are we going
I wouldn't say we can't afford it. I would say partisanship has blocked Congress from being able to pass it.
Senator Anacito, last question.
Okay, so if we're able to create a constitutionality amendment, right? Whose job is it to actually determine that?
The judiciary, but when we know that it's going to be probably ruled as unconstitutional.
Between the time in which we pass today's legislation and it ends up going to the courts, isn't it a net benefit that during that period we required people to wear their masks?
I think that assuming that there's going to be such a gap is kind of getting ahead of ourselves. I think it's very likely, especially in today's climate, that someone's going to fund an immediate legal challenge
But
because
it's
the bill
not up to us to determine constitutionality if we're having that space at all, and if we're able to save some lives.
The cross-examination time has ended.
Point of personal privilege.
State that privilege.
Exit the chamber.
All right, granted. Go ahead. We'll now move forward to
I just wanted to let the chamber know, sorry, presiding officer, we have a hard stop at 6:50. So we want to try to get everyone's speeches in, but just wanted to let you know.
All right. We'll now move forward. All those who wish to speak on the affirmative, please raise your placards now. Due to recency, that does go to Senator Beccaria. Hi, everyone. That's Senator Beccaria, spelled V-A-K-H-A-R-A. Again, that is V-A-K-H-A-R-A. If it helps at all, I was the very last speaker on the very first piece of legislation. I also can't see all of my judges again. Just a quick nod or smile when everyone's ready from the PO, please. Everyone's ready. Just start your first word. Perfect. Okay. Senator Noonan came up here and told us that it's unconstitutional to pass today's legislation because this country does not have the right to force them to wear masks. She even came and cited some Supreme Court cases. Let's bring up another one. In 1905, the Supreme Court judged on this case called Jacobson versus Massachusetts. They ruled that the community has the right to protect itself against an epidemic disease which threatens the safety of its members. Let's take this into consideration in the rest of today's debate and realize that every point of unconstitutionality falls flat, and you receive every positive impact on the affirmation. Senator Mengele gave you the impacts of his legislation. Let me provide you the solvency as to why it actually matters and how we get to those impacts in the first place. The solvency comes from a question. Can the United States Department of Health and Human Services, as outlined in Section 3, actually enact a mask mandate? The answer is yes. That's true because as per current federal laws, the Department of Health and Human Services has the power to do anything that it takes to curb the spread of COVID. Not only was this given to us in the 1905 Supreme Court ruling, it's a fact of the matter. That's because the Congressional Research Service in August 6th of 2020 explains that Section 361 of the Public Health Service Act grants the Secretary of Health and Human Services authority to make sure that we enforce regulations necessary to prevent the introduction,
transmission or spread of communicable diseases from foreign countries into the states in possession or from one state into another, and to even protect the lives of the Americans. This means that the Department of the Health and Human Services has the full capability and has the full ability to make sure that we can enact a mask mandate. That's the solvency of today's legislation. But Senator Noonan continued on with this constitutional possibility. I would say that saving lives outweighs the mere chance of today's legislation is unconstitutional. But how effective has the DHHS been mandating Section 361 of this act? It's actually been pretty effective, because whenever the DHHS needs to invoke this act, they do that too in an effective manner. They have the ability to properly enact today's legislation. That's where the solvency comes from. But the net benefit comes from the idea that we unite Americans together to become a collectivist nation. That's true because when we mandate masks on a federal level, that means you give them more civil liberties. As a nation, we unite with one another to make sure that we become a collectivist nation to achieve progress. Because in the status quo, the United States is an individualist nation. That means it's kind of an idea that every man is for themselves. Let's look at Japan and what happened there. They reported only a little more than 17,000 infections and just over 900 deaths. As a collectivist nation, they made sure to put together and bound together to protect the lives of each other, something that America needs to adopt. When we pass, we make sure that American culture finally has the opportunity to shift and worry about the collective good rather than our individual liberties. You protect the lives of the everyday American. Both sides here are fighting for American lives. You do that on the affirmation. That's why you pass. Because rather than worrying about whether the government is suppressing liberties, we let it be and deal with foreign neighbors, their families, and their protection. You pass today's legislation for the lives of every American.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. All questioners, raise your placards now. We're going to start with Senator Pang.
Hey, so low-income communities in the status quo are seeing face mask shortages, A, because there's not enough supply, and B, because they can't afford them. Doesn't that mean that they won't be able to access face masks?
Okay, so first, I have two responses to that. First, that's not an actual reason to fail today's legislation. It's not a net harm to it.
Hold on. We already know that when we pass today's legislation, we're going to be mandating penalties, right? Doesn't that unfairly make these people pay the penalty?
We can just increase the accessibility of masks later and increase funding to them. Like, that's not an issue.
Senator Bujiamas.
Hi, okay, so can we legislate against individualism? No, right? That's why we need a mask mandate in the first place, because people aren't complying. So with that being said, how does this legislation change anything about people's willingness?
I'm saying that a mask mandate makes sure that we protect each other. Like, that's the bottom line.
How about people who don't have access to masks?
I just told you as a response to Senator Pang that we can increase funding to get masks. That's not an issue. That's not a reason not to fail.
Okay, so can't we make sure that today's legislation isn't passed so those who don't have access aren't
penalized? Just increase
that. Well, question time has lapsed. The speaker and the questions may be muted. I'm trying to make sure we are running really effectively here, so let's keep going. All those who wish to speak on the negation, raise your placards now. Senator Mehrotra, you have the floor.
Hi, that's Senator Divya Mehrotra, spelled Mehrotra. I just want to get through really quickly because I know a couple people want to speak as well. So just give me a smile or nod whenever you're ready. I spoke pretty recently. Yeah, just let me know if everyone's ready.
I believe everyone is ready. You may start.
Sounds good. It's funny that Representative Vicaria gets up here and talks about a collectivist society. As someone who has taken AP English language and prides herself on political science, let's break it down on the other avenue, individualism. Lao Tzu, one of the greatest political scholars in our world, champions this idea that the people must be trusted. Even though our country has proven itself to be one that is by far the worst in terms of caring about other citizens, I vehemently believe in the American people's responsibilities and their desire and empathy and compassion. Let's understand with those values and fail today's legislation. So I really want to kind of go back to this cross-examination period between Representative Bujiamas and the first affirmative speaker. Here's the thing. They both talk about a mask shortage. I want to quantify this issue for you. The Washington Post on September 27th of 2020 tells you that we are seeing over 1 million N95 masks having a shortage for medical workers in the status quo. Why is that so problematic under a mask mandate system? Because the first masks that consumers go to are oftentimes N95 masks. That's a problem because what happens is the large amount of the 350 million Americans who now need to use masks to avoid being fined now move to N95 masks, taking it away from our medical workers who spend every moment of every day fighting for this country. So even if you want to just buy into this collectivist society that Representative Beccaria tells you about, it's for those very people, the very medical workers that our collectivist society has to care about, that we need to fail today's legislation. But why is it even more important for us to fail now? We've been talking about this idea about enforcement at the state level. Let's broaden that scope even more. Let's go to this idea of public workers, especially those in essential businesses. The trace on May 20th of 2020 tells you that at least 2 people have died and 10 have been wounded in incidents where businesses have been forced to tell consumers, please wear a mask, don't enter. By forcing this mask mandate, it isn't the Department of Health and Human Services taking on the enforcement. It's everyday Americans forced into a polarizing situation that you are putting them on the front lines for. Don't make our citizens the frontline soldiers. Make sure that we are first. Fail today's legislation for this primary idea. Although I agree with the collectivist society, although that's my personal ideology, today's legislation doesn't accomplish that. It forces that collectivist ideology to put our frontline workers first in the line of fire. Don't let that happen. Fail today's legislation.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 50 seconds. All questioners, please raise your placards now. We'll start with Senator Beccaria.
Hi, Senator. So what's the best way to protect our public health officials?
Best way to protect I still think is an individualist society.
Not like that, like reducing the spread of COVID, right? That's probably the best.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Exactly. What's been the most effective way in other countries of reducing the spread of COVID?
Contact tracing, and I'm not against expanding contact tracing.
But mask is a pretty big deal, and making sure you reduce COVID, right? Exactly, yeah. So when you don't have a mask mandate, how do you protect those?
You're not focusing on timeline. We need to fix the supply chain first for us to be able to institute a mask mandate.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So the CDC recommends that people within the United States wear masks or face coverings, such as cloth or homemade masks, correct?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you know what % of people with COVID are asymptomatic or have mild symptoms?
I don't know that information. I'm
80%. So if there are people in the United States who are required to wear a mask who don't know that they're possible of infecting other people, wouldn't a national mask mandate prevent that spread without it being an issue?
I will claim for my own state of California, we often see people wearing masks. So this ideology that people aren't wearing masks.
I can prove from Minnesota that they don't all wear masks.
Cross-examination time has ended. Both speakers and questioners, mute yourselves now. We'll now move forward. Just to note to the chamber, it is 6:47. We have 3 minutes left. Parley, do you think we'll get another speech in, or would you like to move to final statements?
I really want to help people, so please give another speech, but really be quick about it.
All right. All those who wish to speak on the affirmative, raise your placards now. Senator Smith, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Parley. I really appreciate that opportunity for a second speech. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Smith, speaking for the second time this legislative session from Eastridge High School. Seemingly, it will be my last, as everybody else's last as well. Not going to waste your time. I'm going to go ahead and get started right away. Mean Girls, a 2004 movie depicting every stereotype applicable to teenage girls, is a classical American chick flick. But growing up in the United States, I've seen some people take stereotypes way too far, using them without any factual basis to create harmful rhetoric. Instead, let me use stereotypes to explain why the United States needs to pass a national mask mandate. First, all the cool kids are doing it. Other countries have already implemented national mask mandates, and over the majority of the countries in the world have had legislation passed in order to do this. According to BBC, just last week, more than half of the world's countries have current mask mandates in place that are going to stay place to the end of 2020. And while the US has encouraged Americans to use masks and face coverings while in public spaces since April 2020, there have been no federal laws requiring the use of face masks nationally. But Senator Noonan, you're probably thinking we can't pass any type of national mandate. Let me explain to you why you're wrong and directly refute that point. Under Article 6, Section 2 of our US Constitution, there is the supremacy clause, claiming that the federal government has the ability to implement any federal laws necessary in order to have the greatest amount of positive effect on the people that we have, qualifying a global pandemic as a time where it may be necessary for the federal government to step in. With using that supremacy clause, we can pass this legislation. And even if it is unconstitutional, that is for our Supreme Court to decide. So pass this legislation and do your job so that they can determine whether the constitutionality of this legislation is valid and do their jobs. Now, second, Aaron Samuels, or Dr. Fauci, national icon and doctor nominated as the sexiest man alive in April of this year. Oh, and also the United States' leading immunologist, serving as the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984, described by the New York Times as one of America's most trusted voices on the coronavirus pandemic, stated in January of this year that wearing a cloth mask as a precaution to catching COVID can only help slow the spread of disease. Although the legitimacy of wearing masks was originally debated in the first months of the pandemic, it has been proven by UC Davis July 6, 2020, that wearing a mask can reduce your chances of contracting COVID by up to 65%. Now, Fauci, a trusted official who uses scientific information to back up his claims and opinions, wants us to wear masks. Let's follow in the lead of our scientists, not in the lead of people who don't know what they're talking about. And finally, cooties. We're going to lower the spread of COVID. Not only does wearing a mask lower your chance of contracting the coronavirus, it also lowers the chance of spreading it. According to the CDC, 80% of COVID cases are mild or asymptomatic, meaning that we could have millions of infected Americans moving and intermingling with the uninfected population and unknowingly be spreading the coronavirus past what we are even able to track with contact tracing. But there's good news, there's hope. In an article published by the CDC in September of this year, it was found that wearing a mask and participating in social distancing makes the chances of contracting the novel coronavirus less than 4% for someone practicing social distancing in the same room as you for over an hour. Now, representatives, we can wear masks, we can wear face coverings, but we need to pass this legislation. Stop letting these stereotypes do harm. Stand with me in the affirmation.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 10 seconds. All questioners, raise your placards now. We'll start with Senator McIntyre.
So how are we going to ensure compliance with this mandate?
That's a great question. So as I brought up with the first questioning period, compliance could be ensured with fines, penalties, anything like that. And we could also—
Are any of those included in this legislation?
Currently, it says that we're going to be working with state governments to come up with those, what happens if you don't wear a mask.
Can you point out exactly where in the legislation it says that?
I believe it was mentioned by an earlier senator. Section 3, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services shall work with state governments to enforce the mandate.
But how are we going to ensure that these state
Senator Marocha?
Hi, so as I said in my speech, our biggest problem is that we're putting our frontline workers as the main enforcers of today's legislation. Why does a mask mandate in specific do that?
So let me explain why frontline workers, yes, they do deserve N95s. We should be giving them all of the PPE possible. But under the CDC, we can do masks, face coverings, or cloth coverings. If we were to amend this legislation—
Yeah. I just want to go with this face coverings idea. Are face coverings as effective as masks?
As effective, no, but more effective than nothing.
So if you're going to force a mask mandate—
Time has elapsed.
Thank you, Chair.
Speakers and questioners, please mute yourselves now. Seeing as we've already passed our hard stop timeline, I will move forward and hear final statements from our sponsor, Senator Mangalik. You have a minute, 30 seconds.
I thank the chair. That's Senator Manglik again, and I'll begin with a thumbs up for my judges.
I believe everyone.
Sorry? It's clear that COVID-19 has affected every facet of our lives. Look at us, the US Senate meeting over Zoom. But today we must affirm, and let's boil down the contentions of the negation into two Fundamental questions. Will today's legislation be instated? And second, is it feasible? So Senator Noonan brings up questions of constitutionality, and I don't want to spend my limited seconds in getting bogged down in a legal debate. So let's just look at 2 reasons why this point shouldn't affect our votes whatsoever. The first reason is because legal issues are non-unique whichever way we pass today. That's because even if we don't pass, Joe Biden will try and instate a national mask mandate in 2 months, meaning that the legal struggle that Ms. Noonan tries to avoid is going to happen anyway. Instead, we need to seize the opportunity right now to save as many lives as possible, because there has been an urgency lacking in today's round. Every second that this Congress hesitates, more Americans will die. That's why we must affirm, no matter the constitutional risks. But second, Representative Mehrotra tells us about N95 shortages. There's 2 reasons why this isn't true, and Senator Smith tried to answer to this, but there's a more systemic reason why this point isn't true. The Washington Post explains in September 2020 that the shortages are for medical grade N95s, but those supply channels are entirely separate from consumers. We're just mandating that consumers use basic everyday masks, but those aren't the ones that doctors are using. So this shouldn't cause—
And with that, I'm going to cut you off, Senator. You will already surpassed your minute 30 seconds limit. So we're now going to move forward to previous question procedures. All those wishing to pass the legislation of a mask mandate, please raise your placards now. All right, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals. All those who wish to fail, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 individuals. All right. And we should have 0 people abstaining, just to double check. All right. With a vote of 5 to 6 to 0, bill unfortunately does not pass. My condolences to our sponsor, Senator Mongolic. And since we've already surpassed our hard stop, I would like to adjourn and congratulate you all for completing the final round.
Yeah, congratulations, everyone. Thank you so much for competing. I know it's been a long day, but congrats on making to the finals round and making the round actually interesting. I enjoyed debate today. I've left my contact information, by the way, in my feedback. So if you ever need anything or have any questions about the feedback you received, please feel free to reach out. And with that, thank you so much to our judges for judging and staying throughout the entire day. I'll pass it over to the tournament director.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Gupta, for those encouraging words. Congratulations again to the 12 of you finalists. Thank you, judges, for hanging on a little bit longer. In terms of tournament announcements, unfortunately, we don't have an awards ceremony, and this is a busy time for a lot of you. Anyway, the president-elect will be addressing the nation in a matter of minutes, so I don't want to keep everyone too long. We will be awaiting the judges' feedback. Judges, if you could just hang on the Zoom until you're done so we can touch base with you and help you out if there's any issues with that. And then we'll be publishing those results on Tab Room at around 9:00 p.m. Central Time. Just to make sure we have adequate time to audit everything, make sure everything is accurate. Oh, and that reminds me, there is a student vote option for this particular round. So in Tab Room, I believe it's a student or competitor